Okay, I know the loft cap isn't actually in the movie, but I had to have a sort of Mandoverse prop, and the loft cap has appeared in the Mandalorian. So,
Hmm.
um, hi everybody, how you doing? Sorry we're running a few minutes late. Life
My fault.
intervenes.
My fault. I'm on call for my office this weekend, and I was telling Gwen before we started that I hadn't gotten any calls from patients over the weekend, and then I got two in the 15 minutes right before we were supposed to start. So if I may, hopefully I won't get any more, but if I do and I have to hop off the stream for a few minutes, that's why. But I will be back.
Oh, then I'll just get to wax poetic about something or other. Hope everybody's doing good. Aside from that, how's your week been, Jared?
It's been really great because guess what, Gwen? We have a new Star Wars movie to talk about, and we've been waiting for
Yeah.
that for almost 7 years. So I am delighted.
Yep. In case it wasn't obvious, because I just mentioned it, we're talking about Star Wars, The Mandalorian and Grogu today, and it's really funny because I've been getting more and more excited about this movie as it's been creeping closer. But it was funny because not yesterday, Friday, I was like, I'm excited to go see it, but like something feels like it's missing. There's a pre Star Wars like adrenaline rush that I'm missing. So I decided to go ahead and before I went to go see the movie, I watched the episodes of The Mandalorian, The Spies, and what's the finale called?
Return. The
The
Return.
Return. And that got me all hyped up and was like, oh my god, I'm so, I'm so excited to go now. And but if that wasn't like didn't do it, it was when all the previews ended, the lights finally went down, and I saw the Lucasfilm logo with the smell of popcorn in the air, and I was like, oh, I'm getting that special feeling.
Hmm.
And like it's a feeling that like I remember all the way back to, I don't remember if like I got it when I went to go see the special editions of Star Wars and Empire, because I didn't actually get to go see the special edition of Return of the Jedi in theaters, which I am eternally like bummed about. um but I remember specifically the experience of seeing the Phantom Menace in theaters and the sort of, I went to go see that movie like over 10 times, maybe close to 13 times. And so I like knew all the trailers by heart. So it was like, all right, let's get through all these. But it was always the same feeling of like chills down my spine when the 20th Century Fox logo hit, and then with that Lucasfilm logo, just waiting for the familiar, with those movies. Of course, it was a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, and then the Star Wars logo and all that. But it's like there's just something, a sense memory that every Star Wars movie I go see now, as soon as that Lucasfilm logo pops up, I'm gonna get chills down my spine, and it's just going to make me feel like a little tiny kid again. And so that was like when it really hit me, and I fully gave myself over to the next couple hours of screen time. But yeah, there's nothing like going to see a Star Wars movie. I'm interested, like before we talk about the movie itself, like what was your like pre-movie experience?
Yeah, it was kind of an unusual lead up to this movie in terms of my anticipation level because I was very excited for it. I'm always excited for new Star Wars, and especially for the return of Star Wars to the theater, because I've always, I fell in love with Star Wars on the big screen with, the special editions of the original trilogy and then the prequels and the sequels and all this. But I also love all the other storytelling that we've gotten. And there's nothing quite like Star Wars on the big screen. And what's been interesting is that the past 6.5 years, basically, since the last theatrical Star Wars movie, The Rise of Skywalker, Star Wars hasn't really been gone from our lives in the same way it was in the gap between the originals and the prequels, or the prequels and the
Yeah.
sequels. I mean, for me, it was never gone because there were always the books and things, but definitely this kind of interval where we've had multiple live action shows and multiple animated shows, all of which we really enjoyed. Like, it's been a more constant presence, but Star Wars has been on the small screen. And I was itching for Star Wars to come back on the big screen, because, again, that's where I think it really kind of can do things that no few other stories can do. But it is notable that when, we got that initial announcement of what the next Star Wars movies would be at Celebration London in 2023, and with the announcement of James Mangold's Dawn of the Jedi movie and Dave Filoni's New Republic movie, and the one I was most excited for, Rey Skywalker's New Jedi Order, directed by Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy. And I was like, any one of those would be a fantastic, next Star Wars movie to see in theaters. And then, funnily enough, in early 2024, we got the surprise announcement. Actually, there's going to be a Mandalorian and Grogu movie, and it's going to come out before all of those. And I was so this always kind of felt like a bonus, like a little bit kind of an extra like gift that we got. But it also meant that my anticipation level for it was perhaps slightly less than a typical Star Wars movie, just because I kind of had a feeling that, like, oh, it's just going to be like, the show, but on a bigger scale. And I was more interested to see what would come next. But as we got closer and closer to it, that typical level of excitement started to build, but it still wasn't at the kind of the frothing level that it was usually when a new Skywalker saga movie was going to come out. I vividly remember before I was driving to go see The Force Awakens for the first time, like, I was extra cautious on the road, because I'm like, I am not going to get myself into a car wreck on the way to the theater before I have a chance to see new Star Wars. But in this case, once I settled into my seat, I was like eager, but I wasn't like bouncing off the walls excited. But as you said, Gwen, like, once that music starts to play with the Lucasfilm logo and the smell of popcorn, we don't get the A Long Time Ago in a Galaxy Far, Far Away, but it was there in spirit. I was just like, I'm home, baby. I'm home. There are a few things in my life that I love more than going to see Star Wars on the big screen, and I'm so ready. And the movie that we got, I enjoyed immensely. And we'll talk about the specifics and kind of, the ups and downs, because I don't think this movie is perfect. But as a whole, I walked out of the theater with just a massive smile on my face. I'm like, Star Wars is back on the big screen, and I love it.
Yeah, yeah, we are going to talk about that, because it was funny, because I have no idea how this film has been received at large, because I've been staying away from all that. The only thing I got was like, I was aware of a, Star Wars YouTubers non-spoiler reaction, which, from what I gleaned, was a bit on the mixed side. And then I made the terrible mistake of checking some things on Instagram one day, and I saw a news website's, headline, which was, I rolled my eyes at, because it was like, you could not have come up with a better sort of stock, you know, review headline that you would expect from one of those. Something to the effect of, you know, um, extended Disney Plus episode is Star Wars at its safest. And I was like, oh God. And I rolled my eyes even harder once I actually saw the movie. Um, So beyond that, I was not aware, and so I just went into this um just ready for it to do whatever it wanted to do to me. Uh and you say the movie is not perfect. I don't know if it's perfect or not. All I know is that there wasn't a single second in this movie where I wasn't smiling ear to ear. So what does that mean? That means I loved every second of it. And and so from what I gather in like the Force Center Discord, everybody seems really pleased with the movie. Mostly everybody. So I don't know. Like I said, I don't know what the larger reaction was, and to be honest, I don't really care. I love this movie. Um and I think it's one of the most, how was the way I put it? Like it was, I think it's just one of the most entertaining and fun Star Wars movies we've ever gotten, um, and I just loved it. So yeah, we'll get into all the specifics of why, but that's like that's my big impression, and and I said when I got out of the theater that this is probably like, I go to like things like rewatchability. I think I will watch this movie probably hundreds of times. And for that reason, I think it's probably going to end up going down as one of my favorite Star Wars movies, particularly of the Disney era, as I said to you the other day. And I couldn't have asked for anything more, which is, it was joyous because I haven't always been like the biggest cheerleader of the Mandalorian as sort of, my flavor of Star Wars, but it was just something about the spirit of the movie and the maybe the fact that we got to spend longer in the world than like a half hour, which, was, the episodes of the Mandalorian haven't always been super short, but there is, but for me, there's always been a feeling of I just want to spend a little bit more time in the in this world, and with these characters, and I just think it was Star Wars at its most gloriously pulpy, um, and and just again, the word that I keep using is fun. It's just such a fun movie. And I think that this is a fantastic movie for new fans to come into, because you don't need to know anything. There's all kinds of treats in there for those of us who do know, but much like I feel like the first season of The Mandalorian, like this feels like a great entry point for um, either casual fans or not, or people who aren't fans who just want to go and be entertained for a couple hours. And so I think that this movie is exactly what they wanted it to be. And yeah, I'm just bitter that I have to save my money, so I can't see it again until my next paycheck next month. But as soon as that comes around, I will be racing back to the theater.
Nice. I can't wait to see it again as well. I wasn't able. I wanted to see it again before this discussion. I wasn't able to because again I'm on call. Fortunately, I might be able to go tomorrow because it's Memorial Day and I have it off. And I agree that the overarching takeaway from this movie is it's just so much fun. And I, like you, I've been avoiding the discourse, but unfortunately, the discourse has a habit of finding me sometimes. And I will just note that we can maybe address some of rebut some of the strains of discourse that are operating around this movie as they go.
I have
Because I
no
think
idea what they are.
I mean, I will enlighten you, or whatever the opposite of that is when it comes, because the thing about the discourse is there are legitimate strains of it out there where like there are criticisms that people are loving against this movie that I think have substance and merit, and I actually agree with in certain cases. And then there are the shitty bad faith discourses that I think you didn't watch the movie, or you didn't watch it, with your heart and eyes open. You just are here for the bad faith grifting, and I have no time for you. Chief among those complaints are the people who seem to think that a Star Wars movie being fun is bad. You can guess who those people are. and what Star Wars they perhaps think is the only good kind of Star Wars. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, but what I will say is that I found this movie to be a joyful experience, even if perhaps in certain respects it was not as ambitious as I typically like my Star Wars movies to be in terms of, scale and emotional pathos. And and we had a conversation via text after the movie where you were talking about how much you loved it, and I did too. And you said that you thought it was one of your favorites of the Disney era. And I just was perfectly honest, was like, two things can be true. I absolutely love this movie. It is my second favorite movie of the year after Project Hail Mary. It is a mortal lock for my top 10 of the year. And it is probably my least favorite live action Star Wars movie. Not only of the Disney era, but overall. And that probably just has to do, again, with my particular preferred flavor of Star Wars, as you said. I kind of have a tendency where when we think about with Star Wars kind of breaking down into things like, the mystical side of Star Wars, the Force, the Jedi, cosmic destiny, like the Luke Skywalker type stories, and then the politics and the, fighting against tyranny and rebellion versus the Empire, clashing alliances with the Republic and the Separatists, kind of the Leia Organa side, and then kind of the the underworld, criminal element, kind of scoundrels and bounty hunters, like the Han Solo kind of story. That particular story flavor has always kind of been third for me among the Star Wars oeuvre, and it's where the Mandalorian has generally lived for the most part. Even though it has Jedi and all the other great elements that make Star Wars great. But what I will say is I actually think that this movie, I enjoy it more than all but the best of the Mandalorian episodes of the television show. And I actually think that one of the things that's interesting about this movie is that even though it's based on a television show that has been running for 3 seasons or 4 seasons, if you include the Book of Boba Fett, I actually think you can hop into this movie not having seen a single episode of The Mandalorian, and you can get it because it tells you everything you need to know right up front. It doesn't overtly draw back on lore from the show. A few characters appear, but again, you don't really need to know their backstory to get their purpose in the movie. And that, I think, I agree, makes it a fantastic jump on point, especially for the franchise's core audience, which is, both the young kids and those of us who remember what it was like to be a kid once. And I will note that in terms of the reaction, it's notable that even though, guess, surprise, surprise, certain critics are basically like, this movie doesn't have the substance that we want from something like Andor or whatever, audience scores are actually very high. And the highest of audience scores, like sky high audience scores, guess what? Are audience members under the age of 18. Because this movie ultimately is for kids who, again, people who are willing to go on that kind of childlike, joyous journey of wonder, and along the way learn some lessons. Because I do think this movie has themes, like deep themes, but they are the kind that you kind of have to dig for, much less so than something like Andor, which, as great as that show is, I argue this, and people sometimes take it the wrong way, Andor is not a subtle show. It kind of takes its themes and puts it right up in your face, so to the point that you can't ignore what Star Wars is really about at times.
I am going to quibble with you there. I think its politics are not subtle, but I think the artistry of the show is subtle.
Well, that's a completely different thing. I'm talking about the fact that people think for a story to have substance, basically it means that it has to be that overt with its political themes, and they can't be any like pulpy, weird aliens or droids running around, because those aren't serious. Like, that's what I mean when I say that, like, where I get so frustrated with that strain of discourse, where people look at something like this and they're just basically like, oh, this is the kiddie Star Wars that, no, we don't have time for, and the franchise needs to move beyond. No, this is with the franchise kind of Jon Favreau, original trilogy fan, and very much as this show goes, big fan of the Return of the Jedi, the Jabba's palace sequence in Return of the Jedi, because there is a lot of callbacks to that. I think that this is a movie that really works as like an entry point and as a morality tale, which Star Wars is at its best, and as a way for us to kind of celebrate, kind of, as you said, the pulpy weirdness of Star Wars and the heart of Star Wars, the core themes of hope, choice, and found family. It just also does it in a way that, for me personally, is like, I will acknowledge that sometimes when it comes to like the ambition of it, like I tend to think that even a movie like, say, Attack of the Clones, which some people think is like among the weaker Star Wars movies, like that movie, I don't know if it's quite as successful in its execution of certain themes, but it also has some of the just soaring emotional highs and peaks that, for me, at least on this first viewing, I didn't get from this. But that's fine. I've only seen it once, and my love for franchises grows over time. And so for me, like when I say that it's probably my least favorite live action Star Wars movie, that's not meant as a slight. Like all 11 of the previous live action Star Wars movies are like in my top 50 movies of all time. And like this one may get there and over once I've had a chance to see it a few more times. It just so happens that my initial reaction was like, I both loved it, and I found myself feeling like I didn't get quite as much of like the emotional catharsis as I got from, say, coming out of like the sequel trilogy films, or even something like Solo, which I thought that, for me personally, like was also a rollicking, fun ride, but whose themes kind of resonated with me personally a little bit more. But again, like I don't want this to be a negative tinged stream, because I did love the movie. It's just that when you say it's one of your favorite, going to be one of your favorite Star Wars movies of the Disney era and possibly of all time, I just have to be honest, that's not where I am. But that doesn't mean that we can't have a great discussion about it, because there is so much to love.
Well, we just recently had a discussion where, um, not in too dissimilar in the fact that you know, we were actually talking about the movie that is last on my list, and it's
Yeah.
really, really high on yours, which is The Rise of Skywalker. Um, yeah, for me, this movie did hit me emotionally, perhaps not in the same way that, like, when you have John Williams soaring, you know, beautiful themes behind it, and like sort of epic, save the galaxy stakes, and that's why I actually compare this movie most to Solo, in a very positive way, in the fact that I think the stakes are smaller, but they're no less important for the characters in the story. Um and like I don't know, I can't help but get emotional over Grogu, because he's such a cute little guy. And I just think of, like, I think for me, just the sequence that makes this movie sing for all the great action and fun beats is the stretch towards the end of the film, when Grogu has to take care uh Din Djarin, and just the sort of showing his, love for Din, and particularly when he's waiting to see if Din's gonna be okay, and he's just like, you know, holds his hand and then snuggles up with him. I was just really touched in a way that maybe it's not as um I again, like I think it's more subtle emotion than some of the sort of bigger emotional highs of some of the Skywalker films, but for me, it really resonated, because it's that father son dynamic and that relationship, and it's all the more so because you don't get, like, traditionally in these sort of emotional stories, you know you don't have, one character who doesn't really speak, and then the other character who you can't see their face most of the time. And so I'm constantly like in awe of the fact they make me feel so much for these characters and their bond together. And I just thought that that was so done really well. And so it, yeah, it's there's a quote by Frank Darabont on the behind the scenes documentary of Blade Runner, where he talks about how he held the film at distance for quite, and I actually, this resonated with me because it kind of echoes my feelings on the movie and how they've changed, like where he was expecting like this big gigantic present watching the movie, and it's in this big ornate box, with a big bow and everything, and then he opens up the package and it's this small little gift, and that it's not that the gift isn't precious, but that it just didn't quite measure up with the outer packaging. And so that's kind of how I feel about sort of like the emotional impact of this film, where it's just a father and a son, and it's them caring for each other, and it's just this emotional bond that's a bit more quiet than maybe we're used to in Star Wars, but it resonated with me so strongly though. Um so yeah, it really, it hit me emotionally. And yeah, I do like this style of Star Wars, because it wasn't just, I felt, to me it felt like it wasn't just what we get in The Mandalorian, the TV show, which I do enjoy, but I've certainly had my struggles with it at times. But I mentioned this when we were discussing it after I had seen the movie, where it was like, to me, not only did this feel like The Mandalorian, but it also felt like a love letter to the animated shows, which just
Mhm.
made me love it so much more. I mean, we got freaking Rada the Hutt, another Star Wars movie with Dave Filoni behind it, that was about rescuing Rada the Hutt. And I was cracking up while I was watching this movie when I realized that that's what the actual plot of the movie was. And I was like, well, I guess if it once, and I'm not saying he failed the first time around, but if it once you fail, try again. And it just cracked me up because of how that the Clone Wars animated film was received, back in 2008. And here we are with, him having his hands on another like big screen Star Wars movie. It wasn't even his idea. It was Jon
Oh,
Favreau who said
exactly.
we should bring Rada in. So, like, I don't know. I just found that so both hilarious and wonderfully endearing, because it was like a middle finger to all the people who groaned about Rada, as Stinky, the adorable Hutling. Um, and and then just like characters like having Zeb be such a big part of the movie, and having Enbo, and you know and even moving besides like animation references, having the Hutt twins as the principal villains from the Book of Boba Fett, and and from the novels and comics, the droid Gatra. When I heard that in the movie, I was like, uh, it just felt like, yes, this was fresh and new and accessible for new fans, but it also felt just like a treasure trove of gifts for those of us who followed things like the animated shows and the books and the Disney Plus shows. Um, and so like I couldn't help but be endeared by all that. And okay, like we don't have to dance around it. We know exactly who the people complaining about like the tone of the movie were. They're the Andor, you know, acolytes, no pun intended. I love Andor. It's my favorite Star Wars show, but I'm sick and tired of this whole narrative of now that we've had Andor, every Star Wars needs to be both like artistically mature in that sort of, prestige television way, and it needs to be very overtly political in a way that speaks to today's times. And this movie has politics.
Mhm.
It's just not like, oh, let's hammer this home and make sure you're angry about everything that's going on in the real world right now, because oh my God, how dare we just want to have fun for a couple hours watching a movie. Um, and again, I don't say any of this is a slight to Andor. Like I said, it's my favorite Star Wars television show. It's, you know, live action at least, and and it's got to be one of my favorite Star Wars things ever. And it's brilliant. Um, but no, not all Star Wars should be Andor. Andor is not George Lucas Star Wars, and some people will say, yeah, that's why we like it, but like, I'm sorry, if you were a kid who loved watching, the original Star Wars or Empire or Return of the Jedi back when you were a kid, then I'm sorry, screw you for saying that a Star Wars movie can't be like this. Um,
Mhm.
because I'll tell you what, when Grogu is trying to shove Mando into that little, hut that he's built that keeps trying and banging his helmet
Mhm.
on, like the entire theater was just cracking up. It was Everybody was dying. And that, like, something like that bringing joy to so much people, just gonna say fuck you if you would begrudge anybody that kind of joy and fun.
Yeah.
Um, you know, there'll be, you know, there'll be something else like Andor. I'd argue we just got it with
Mall Shadow Lord.
Maul Shadow Lord, and which was that plus some pulp, some Star Wars pulp. It was like it was such a great mixture of everything. And so yeah, and on the other side of the spectrum, we have this, which is just
Mhm.
delightfully fun. It's for audiences of all
Mhm.
ages. It's I think it's one of the most purest expressions of Star
Mhm.
Wars as it was going all the way back to 1977. Sorry, but like Star Wars is a generational story. It's not made just for you and should change as you get older and your
Mhm.
tastes change. It should continue to be something where a young kid can come into the theater and be spellbound and wowed by and yeah, you just have to get over it. I'm sorry.
Yeah. They do. They won't, because to them their heliocentric worlds evolve around them and their desperate need to be taken seriously, because
Yeah.
I fear that a lot of the discourse around all Star Wars needs to be Andor is people who are afraid, yes, I'm talking to you, afraid to acknowledge that something that can be enjoyed by all ages can still be mature and deep, and it can't, we have to like really lean into the dark misery and real world politics in order for something to have substance. Again, I fully agree with you. Andor is a masterpiece. It's my favorite of the live action Star Wars shows, close with Obi-Wan, but it does take the edge. But it is not my favorite flavor of Star Wars, frankly. Like, my tastes are a little bit different. And yes, that includes things like me loving the grand operatic tales that we get in things like Revenge of the Sith. And yes, The Rise of Skywalker, a movie I love with the fiery passion of 10,000 suns. And it's probably, in some days, I think, pretty close to my perfect idea of what Star Wars can be. But this also has some of that heart in it. And what I think was really kind of, this is where we can kind of start to bring in some of those strains of discourse and shoot them down. Two of the things that people are throwing at this movie are things that you mentioned. People who are trying to claim that it is
My
safe.
Mother Ryan,
My
yeah,
brother.
we will be talking spoilers, so so yeah, just be cautious. But thank you for popping in and
Yeah,
saying hello. We love you.
always a delight to see you. Yeah, but people who say that this movie is safe, and people who say that this movie is just a big episode of the Mandalorian television show. Those things I feel are, in the case of it's just a big episode of the television show, objectively wrong, because this is not season 4 of The Mandalorian. Jon Favreau has explicitly said he had the scripts for season 4 of The Mandalorian. He set those aside so that he could write a movie that is different in its structure and its approach and its scale. But even if you say that, like, oh, it's kind of has a similar feel to a Mandalorian episode, it's kind of like, well, yeah, because that's the kind of the story that Jon Favreau is going with these characters, that, like, he's a bounty hunter who's going on missions, so we're gonna have some of that flavor. But what I would say,
Well, yeah, can I just comment on that real quick? I'm both. Here's the thing, like, first of all, I don't think that it's just an episode of a long episode of television series, because the television series never was allowed to have the scale that this has and the room to breathe. Like, but then I will sort of punch back and say that there is this tendency also that when you are making a movie version of a television series, that you have to somehow change some things up to impress people and make them think, oh wow, this is a movie, instead of, like, I'm thinking of, like, you know when creators say change composers or redo some of the design elements, you know just make sure we don't go to any of the same locations as in the TV show. Let's make sure everything looks sort of fresh and new, and because this is a movie, so we can't do any of the same things that the TV show does. I think that the Mandalorian and Grogu threads this line very well. It's bigger, it's bolder, it's, I think it does have the space to be more emotional, um, but it is also still the Mandalorian,
Mhm.
and which is what, like, oh my God, what a crime! It's people who want to see the Mandalorian on the big screen are essentially still getting that flavor that they love. Um, and the fact that, like, I loved the fact, for instance, that after the big opening of the movie, we get an opening logo that is pretty much exactly what we get on the TV show, except with the addition of "and Grogu." And but then we get an opening title sequence that felt ripped out of Top Gun, which was great. Which, by the way, side note, I cracked up because all the way back when the Phantom Menace was coming out, for some reason it never occurred to me that the prequel movies would open in the exact same way as the original movies, with, like, the opening crawl and the main, like, Star Wars theme and all that. So until I actually saw the movie, or no, until I listened to the soundtrack and realized that that's how it would open, I just took it for granted that it was going to open like a regular movie. And I was expecting, like, a George Lucas film, Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. And I don't know why I thought that, but so it was strangely, like, um I don't know what the word is I would use for it, but, like a full circle thing to get, like, a traditional opening credit sequence for this movie, which I just loved. And like I said, it felt very Top Gun, so I love that. So yeah, I just wanted to say that, like, it is both, like, a movie version of The Mandalorian. It is a movie, but it also doesn't run away from the things that made The Mandalorian as a show appeal to so many people. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, and like I said, it's the kind of thing where like you don't want to lose the essential DNA of what made these characters and this version of the story special just because you're translating it into a different medium on a different scale. Like, but
Yeah,
because it is not a carbon copy of the show, but like, yes, there are going to be elements of the show in there because that is what it is. It's right there in the
yeah.
title. In that way, it kind of reminds me a little bit of another movie version of a TV show I thought was really successful, which is Serenity, which is the movie
Travis.
based. Hi, Travis, based on Firefly. Which, funnily enough, I actually saw that movie before I ever saw the TV show, and much like that, I actually was able to follow it perfectly. And then I went back and watched the TV show later. But what I just wanted to also respond to the discourse complaint that this movie is safe. I will split this up. I agree that it was safe in its marketing concept because I do think that the reason we got this movie before all those other announced Star Wars movies that stars Celebration, the one starring Rey, The Dawn of the Jedi, the Day Following the New Republic movie, is because Disney executives like Bob Iger came in and basically said, we need a movie that's guaranteed to be a win. That Mandalorian and that little baby Yoda guy, people love them. They buy the toys. Make that. And I think Jon Favreau said, okay, I'll play ball. But he has enough power in the industry and enough control and love of these characters that he can be like, but if I'm going to make this movie, I'm going to make it my way.
Yeah,
And this is a movie that, as you said, in terms of its like what is actually in there, is not a very safe movie at all. Like a movie that has a 20-minute sequence that is centered purely around a puppet with essentially no human characters and it's almost dialogue free, not a safe choice. A movie that essentially makes the emotional linchpin, my favorite character in the entire movie, a giant slug creature, Rada the Hutt, introduced as a little, stinky baby in the Clone Wars movie all those years ago. But now a jacked Hutt who's going through essentially like emotional trauma and catharsis of trying to become his own person in this galaxy and not be tied to his father's legacy. Not a safe choice. And I would, and all again,
this asks you to think that anything about this is safe. Taking
yes.
like, yeah, a jacked up hut. Speaking English, by the way, which we've never gotten. Like, we get both the twins and Rodus is speaking. Oh, well, sorry, basic, we should say. And and like he's all jacked up, and this is, by the way, this is Rada the Hutt. This is Stinky from the Clone Wars animated movie. What about his inclusion makes you feel that it's a safe choice
Yeah. Yeah.
for your first Star Wars movie in 7 years?
Yeah, I guarantee you that when Disney executives, told Jon Favreau, make Baby Yoda movie, they were not expecting him to go, all right, I'm going to make the Baby Yoda movie featuring the Punky Muffin himself from Star Wars The Clone Wars, that animated movie that launched the Clone Wars TV show, but everyone kind of agrees, was probably, it has its rough spots. I guarantee Bob Iger was not like, yes, do that. He was probably like, who the is Rotted up? but again, one of the things that this movie does is, even though yes, we have that beloved context of where Rada comes from, and we do get a nice nod to that, his original appearance with the hologram of the little pedunky muffin. You do not need to know his backstory in order to appreciate him in this character, in this movie. You just have to know that he's Jabba the Hutt's son, and he's essentially trying to get away from that legacy and become his own man. And that actually is one of my favorite, arcs and character developments in this entire film, because again, he's a giant slug creature, and we're introduced to him not only as a giant slug creature, but also he's in the gladiatorial pits, fighting, and we think like, oh, well, then he's just kind of like a killer who loves violence and the roar of the crowd, and he's just going to be like an evil antagonist like his father. And then it's immediately followed by a very sweet and sensitive scene where he's like, feeding Grogu and talking about, don't worry, I'm not my father, and talking about how um, everyone expects me to live up to this legacy of my father, but I don't want it. I want to be my own person. I want to make my own way. And it's like, again, unexpected, not a safe choice, because we could have just very easily had Rada like in the twins role of the antagonist, but that's not who this character, it turns out, is. And I love that they decided to do that. And basically, it's just so it's, again, people needing to look beyond the surface level to actually find, that this movie does have themes. And yes, and like I did enjoy the joke that some people put out about Rada, that like the punky muffin became a stud muffin, because kind of. But Rada, just he was not who you expected. Like, he's much softer and more emotionally intelligent character, and I think the movie, frankly, doesn't work without him.
Um, I I just remember going back and thinking, why are they casting Jeremy Allen White as Rada the Hutt? Because I did not. I remember, like, I did not expect Rada to be such a big part of the film. Because I thought he was just going to be like, pops up for like one section of the movie, and then that's it. But he is sort of. I don't think he's the linchpin of the movie, but I think he's one of the big linchpins of the movie and the driving force of the plot. And so I just, yeah, I thought Jeremy Allen White just gave a great performance, and it just did feel so validating. But like, I'm not saying that, like, I certainly don't think the 2008 Clone Wars is without its issues. It has a number of them, but I'll always have great affection for it because it launched the Clone Wars and it's launched Ahsoka, and and it just, I think it does have, like, it launched the Kiners doing music for Star Wars. Like, there's so many things in it you know, that I look at very fondly. And so, um, but I just remember one of the biggest things people complained about. Well, they were both Hut related. They were Rada and Zero, and we haven't quite gotten around to the rehabilitation of Zero.
Yeah. Zero was cut down before his time.
Yeah.
He never got the chance to make a better choice as Rada does. But who knows? Perhaps one day we will see him in live action in all of his, Truman
Maybe,
Capote voice, and we will
maybe
see
he'll
different.
claw his way out of the Sarlacc pit. Uh,
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. He even in the universe where characters come back from the dead and various Zero looked pretty damn dead when he was shot in that episode. But who knows?
um, so yeah, it's like, yeah, and then you just, like, again, I called it, I think, this one of, one of the pulpiest Star Wars ever, Star Wars. And it's not just Rada, it's, all the wonderful creatures, all the, in the arena, all the creatures come to life from, the Star Wars chessboard, or you know, whatever it's called.
The
And
jar, yeah.
the yeah, and I mentioned the droid Gatra, which was really cool, and the swamp creature that Grogu, talks with, who helps him heal Mando, and like there, and just like the Huts, like, fighting and rolling around like a bunch of slugs. It's like there's so much about this movie that is just so gloriously, like, kooky and weird,
Yeah.
and like there is nothing that I get why the idea to make a Mando and Grogu movie feels like a safe choice, but the execution of the movie is anything but safe. And so, yeah, I think that's bullshit. That, you
Again,
know,
again, again, it's people not wanting to engage with the deeper substance of it. People just think like the people who basically think these movies exist to sell toys. Like, of course, they're going to reject this out of hand as a cynical corporate ploy because Bait Grogu is one of the most marketable characters probably ever created. If
yeah,
you see like all the merchandise featuring his adorable little face, but as you said, like you actually have to engage, as our friends at Force Center always say, engage with the story that's being presented to you, not the story you wish was being told. Because anyone who was expecting this movie to be something like Andor, like obviously it was not going to be. It's like and you can either like accept that and try to engage with what is there, or you could do the absolutely radical freaking thing of just don't watch it. It's not part of, maybe you don't enjoy this particular corner of the Star Wars buffet, but a lot of us do, and we're gonna, make our feelings known that yes, this is something that still has value in the Star Wars galaxy.
uh, yeah, and like I think like Andor worked so well as like its own meal on the television side of things. And I know a lot of people love Rogue One. I like Rogue One a lot, but it's not among I know for a lot of people it's like one of their favorite Star Wars movies, if not their absolute favorite Star Wars movie. I've got to be honest, it's on the lower end for me. At least in the Disney era. I will because and that's because I kind of when I go see a Star Wars movie in theaters, I kind of want to have a whole lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And like Road One has a lot of fun towards the end of the movie, a little less so like early on. I have to be honest, I've always found it a bit too straight laced,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not to like I'm not saying that to like um slight the movie, because I think it's great at what it does, and I think it works even better as like a third act of the Andor story. um but there is something about going to see Star Wars in the theater where principally I want to just be whisked away and have a fun time. And I think that's why this worked so well for me. Um but yeah, let's like just I don't even like obviously we're 15 minutes into this discussion and we've just been generally talking about sort of like big picture stuff and the reaction to it. So I'm just going to fly all over the place. I want to like first I want to talk about how much I loved having Zeb in this movie,
Mm-hmm.
um, because it's just like, and the character worked so wonderfully well for people who have no idea who he is. He was just like this fun sidekick character, but like um as someone who loves Rebels so much and loves Zeb in particular, like I was just like so happy just to have him alone for so much of the ride. And just like there's this shot of him like during the opening credits. Again, it was all very Top Gunish, but him like walking side by side with Mando to the you know to Ludwig Göransson's music. And I was like, oh my god, this is so cool, this is so fun. And like I just want to say like how much I never expected like Zeb to be like one of the major characters in a big screen Star Wars movie.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, this is a perfect example of like those of us who have watched Rebels and watched, the Mandalorian television show, like, and know Zeb's rich history. Like, we carry all that in, and when we see him, and like, oh my God, it's Zeb, like, and he's so great. But for somebody who has never seen any of those shows, I think Zeb just works as kind of the the fun, Mando's kind of fun, sardonic, wingman, the one who's going to always be in his corner, but also is going to call him out, like for in that great opening sequence when Mando does this incredible like feat of taking out these 3 Imperial walkers and killing this Imperial warlord. And he flies back up, and then Zeb's like, should have taken him alive. And Mando just kind of like, complications ensue. And it's kind of like, I didn't see you down there helping me, buddy. Like, maybe I could have used an extra hand. But yeah, like Zeb is one of those characters that like I was wondering, frankly, if we were ever going to see him in live action, just because he was going to be such a challenge to, uh, do in a realistic fashion, which is why I was so delighted when he cropped up in season 3 of The Mandalorian. But like you, when I saw that, like, oh, Zeb's going to be in this movie, like they must be very confident that he can handle his like they can handle like the way he moves and the way he fights. Because yes, in the Mandalorian show, he just kind of he sits at the bar at the Adelphi base and he talks. But in this movie, he's using his like electrical staff and kicking stormtroopers' asses and sniping back and forth with Mando, and it's like it's Zeb. He's like you buy it completely. So yeah, I really enjoyed having him in the movie, even though he is he's not in a ton of it, but what is there is really strong, I think.
Well, he has a lot of like, particularly in the first half of the movie, like his presence is felt throughout.
Mm.
Even if he's not like in every scene, but so I just and then like I cheered when he showed up again at the end.
Yeah.
I just it just gave me so much joy. Um, and again, like I think they struck such a wonderful balance of like as I said, making it accessible for new viewers, but all the characters and callbacks that we longtime fans recognize, it just like it just made me feel all warm and fuzzy. And yeah, it's and speaking of which, since you mentioned the Delphi base, can I just say, like, I was just loving the cameo galores of, all the creatives,
Yeah.
from The Mandalorian and Star Wars at large being the pilots. It made it feel like, and maybe some people would use this as a slight, but I mean it with like all possible affection. It made the whole thing feel like a big giant homemade movie.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and
Sorry,
like
but
no, I was just gonna say, and like yeah, like for instance, like that's one of the things that people can take in bad faith, even though it's clearly intended to be a spirit of fun, is like the cameos by like what we affectionately refer to as the director squadron of Dave Filoni's Trapper Wolf and Rick Famuyiwa's Jib Dodger and Deborah Chow's Sash Kether. They even add a new member in Lee Isaac Chung, who had directed episodes of The Mandalorian and Skeleton Crew, as Doc Surrey, and yes, of course, our beloved Captain Carson Teva, played by Paul's son
I
Chung
was
Lee.
so I was so dreading that he was going to get left out of this because I didn't see him at first.
Yeah,
And yeah, and that not only was he seen, he got lines, and I was very happy. So
yeah, 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 and I personally like I was definitely I was expecting he would be in it. Like he was one of the few characters. I'm like it'd be so makes so much sense for him to be there because Mando's working with the New Republic at a Delphi base, and so like it's not going to feel forced. But like I did enjoy like his presence at the final battle. I was nervous for a minute there, like, don't are they going to kill him off? No, fortunately they they saved him. But I also and like again, this is one of those things where people who watch the movie with their arms crossed would be like, Dave Filoni cameo, meh. And I'm just like, it's supposed to be fun. They're playing a very minor character. Like, roll with it or
you
don't.
don't, and unless you're a big Star Wars fan, you don't know who these people are anyway. So it's
Yeah,
not like it doesn't stand out to me that like in the way that yeah, I'm gonna say it, like Jack Black, over the top cameo is these. It's like seeing Peter Jackson in
yeah,
the Lord of the Rings. It's fun for those of us in the know,
yeah.
um, but yeah. I just loved that so much. Yeah, and oh God, I'll just like I'll take this opportunity to also I mentioned him once already because I'll also use this as a springboard to talk about one of the locations in the movie is just the score by Ludwig Göransson, which I thought was absolutely amazing. Um, I just I think I've always been quite impressed with the music on the show, but Ludwig, when he gets a bigger canvas to work with, he can really do a lot. Obviously we're big fans of his from movies like Oppenheimer and Sinners, and so it's was fun to get to you know here is sort of the expanded palette of the music here, which of course had the main Mandalorian themes. But I'm thinking of oh God, what's the sec?
Mhm.
I want to make sure I get the some of the music that stood out for me was the music for the planet Shikari, which was very like it felt like more traditional, like futuristic science fiction music um, with sort of like almost a techno element to it. And I was just like, oh, I'm digging this. This is fun. And yeah, I just thought he did a brilliant job. There's the sequence when Mando tells Grogu to leave with the Anzellans and stays on the planet and like fights off a bunch of bad guys, but he's succumbing to the poison. There's this stretch of music that plays that for me was like really emotional, and um it's Mando kind of accepting that like he's gonna die on this planet and he's not gonna see Grogu again. And it just again like it's sort of what I've longed for with the show, where we just get to sort of sit in one of these stories for a bit longer and feel sort of the weight of what's going on. And I just thought that Ludwig's scoring for that scene was so beautiful. Um, and, as is like the score for that entire section when it's just, Grogu on his own, alone, because the music has to do so much there. I've been enjoying listening to that soundtrack over the past couple days since I saw the movie because it reminds me back to when I was a kid, and it's like you can't go back to see the movie yet. Well, you can listen to the soundtrack over and over.
I've been listening to the soundtrack as well, and there are definitely a few standout tracks. You mentioned the Shikari, the music from the planet Shikari, which has that kind of electro futuristic techno bop element to it that it does not is not traditional Star Wars music at all. But when the hands of Ludwig Göransson, it definitely feels kind of like something that would yes belongs in the universe, kind of in a similar way to like the Niamos track from Andor. And yeah, the music. I believe the track is called "Go Kid" when he's fighting off the droids to try and allow Grogu and the Anzellans to escape. Like that's much more like emotional and character centered. Yeah, this is one of those elements where like if you're yes, this movie doesn't have a traditional John Williams orchestral sweeping score, but Ludwig Göransson is basically becoming the John Williams of his time to the tune of 3 Oscars in 7 years. And it's kind of like, and his Mandalorian theme is already iconic. So I was delighted that he, was so invested in this because he stepped back from doing the music on I think Mandalorian season 3, and so I was delighted to hear he was returning for the movie, and he knocked it out of the park. I also love the music that plays during the sequence when Grogu's on his own. It's called Grogu's World, and
Yeah.
it builds off Grogu's theme from the show, but it also becomes much more emotional and inquisitive, and so yeah, Ludwig, A plus work on the score from this from him, and I personally think that regardless of the way of where Star Wars chooses to go musically next, it owes a debt to Ludwig Göransson for kind of expanding our palette as to what we think music in a Star Wars story can be.
I was thinking about the same. I'd have to listen a bit more closely to some of that latter Grogu music, but I was trying to think, are there any instances did you pick up any instances of the Force theme,
No,
in this movie at all?
not the traditional Force theme. It was more Grogu's theme, which
Yeah,
has kind of similar elements and cadence to the Force theme in the sense that that was kind of what the Mandalorian show would use anytime Grogu was, doing something mystical or powerful with the Force. Like when he was training with Luke in the Book of Boba Fett. It kind of makes sense to me that there are certain staples like the traditional Force theme that are not present here because the Force, even though Grogu is a Jedi and he's using the Force, like it's a different way. It's at a different level and with different emotional stakes than the way
yeah,
the Force theme is traditionally used in the Star Wars movies, which is for like the characters who are on their grand hero's journey, like facing moments, like iconic moments that will shape their destiny. And Grogu is going through something like that in this movie, but it's on his own, miniature scale. And while size matters not, Grogu has his own journey to go through, and so it makes sense that it would be his theme and not the Force theme, that we've come.
yeah. I didn't really miss it at all. It just surprised me because you'd figure, it's a Star Wars movie, and regardless of the composer, you'd think
Yeah.
you'd want to find a way to squeeze it in somewhere. And since Grogu does have like Force moments, obviously in the film, I just wondered if I had missed it or something. But I'll have to go back and see if there's even just a little hint of it. But I thought like it's pretty remarkable that his main sort of, a number of his themes, but especially the main Mandalorian theme is so iconic in its own right now that like it's, that his themes are allowed to carry a Star Wars film and not feel the pressure to like try to, put in some of the more classic stuff, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Um,
But
I,
speaking of music, but unless you were gonna talk about something else about that.
Oh, no, I mean, we can stick with the music. I was just gonna, before we left the Delphi base, I was gonna want to talk about Sigourney Weaver's character,
Yes, absolutely. Let's do it.
yeah, yeah, just because she was like the big name, the big addition, the first name that we knew was going to be part of the cast outside of obviously Pedro Pascal and Brendan Wayne and Lateef Crowder who played the Mandalorian, and no surprise, we love Sigourney Weaver. She has a long history of iconic roles in science fiction and fantasy projects. Not only her iconic role as Ripley in the Alien franchise and her role in things like Ghostbusters, but her role in the Avatar movie. So it made perfect sense. It's like, of course, she can be in Star Wars, and she's going to play this kind of no-nonsense New Republic colonel, former and now current, it seems, X-wing pilot, who is going to be able to credibly give Mando the business. Because the Mandalorian is obviously a very Din's a very formidable character. He doesn't take guff from anybody who tries to do him wrong, and so like you need an authoritative figure like the late great Carl Weathers and Grief Karga, or someone like Sigourney Weaver as Colonel Ward to essentially credibly be able to tell him what to do. And in this case, again, she's not in the movie a ton, but I really loved I loved the recurring kind of joke about the fact that, again, like Mando was doing all this incredibly impressive stuff, and then as soon as he comes back and talks to Colonel Ward, she's like, messy, C plus. Yes, you got the bad guy, but we wanted him alive so that we could question him. And then Grogu tries to steal her food, and she's like, it's just she like just has so much effortless, charisma and gravitas that like
I
instantly she
was
just feels like she belongs.
I thought she did a really good job. Because I guess I did have like a small amount of fear that like, and I don't want to like, obviously Sigourney Weaver's a professional, so like it would never be intentional, but like there was a little bit of fear that like she just thinks she's gonna have this little role in Star Wars. Is she gonna phone it in a little bit? And like, but I felt her gravitas. Like I really enjoyed her scenes and yeah, like you said, she's not in it a whole ton, but I thought she did a really good job of like you know standing up against Mando and giving him shit. And so I really enjoyed her. It'd be nice to see her in like future Star Wars.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I hope she is too. Like, if the
yeah.
story of if this continues, like, I absolutely believe she could show up in like Dave Filoni's New Republic film, or hell, maybe even something like Ahsoka season two. But I in particular also appreciated that Colonel Ward was the character who kind of did set this movie's stakes in terms of what we're actually fighting for, because she's the one who, when she tells Mando like that we're trying to take these characters alive, she has the line that was present in all the trailers that like, this isn't about revenge, this is about preventing another war. Like, we're going after these guys because they're trying to essentially you know accumulate power and basically bring back the empire, and we're trying to protect everything that we fought for and sacrificed for. And yes, I understand that the Mandalorians had suffered greatly at the hands of the empire, so probably feels good for Din to take them out. That's one of the reasons he wants to work for the New Republic, is so that he's not taking jobs from scumbags like the Hutts and like the twins anymore. He is actually putting his skills and his talents for violence to a good purpose. But she also has to remind him that like, there's a bigger picture here that we're trying to protect. And I really did, think that was kind of a necessary thing for us to have, because obviously, even though this movie doesn't get into it at all, we know that in the context of the larger Star Wars story of this era, that something we'll probably be seeing more in something like Ahsoka season two. Grand Admiral Thrawn is out there, and he is trying to like full on bring back the empire. And so what they're doing here is essentially trying to, on the margins, prevent that from happening. And I did appreciate that, because of this was the story of the movie, even though I've been hoping for it before the movie, I kind of think it was the right call for them not to get into all that and like add like a Thrawn post-credit scene or cameo at the end, because then again the general audience would have been like, who's this blue guy who seems very evil? But we know that, like, again, as part of the larger Star Wars tapestry, like, Thrawn is out there consolidating his power, and what the New Republic is doing, much like as Hera says in Ahsoka season two, is like, the people who are aware that this is a real threat are out there trying to essentially prevent the tyrannical return of the Empire. And there are people who just don't want to deal with it, and the people who are actually on the front lines know how bad they are. And we get to see a little bit of that in the opening scene with the I believe his name is Commander Barrow, the Imperial that Din hunts and kills, where he's basically just like, the Empire, long live the Empire. We all know it's been a disaster since the New Republic took over, and it will only be a matter of time before the galaxy comes crawling back to us to restore order. But in the meantime, I'm doubling all of your tributes, because you are just, essentially means to an end for me. And you're like, this is a guy who, yes, frankly, even though it would have been useful for them to bring in to the New Republic for questioning, this is a guy who probably needs to go. So I think it's very satisfying to see Din just take him out, even though Ward ultimately is correct that they're doing this for a bigger purpose.
I I thought that this opening sequence was just a perfect encapsulation of fascist assholery. And because it's, on the one hand, you've got people who will impose their will on others and won't hesitate to shoot down, any kind of, dissenters. It's very cold the way, they show him basically just, you know, the way he just shoots down, one of the leaders. And but then at the same time, then, when word comes through that, that Mando's coming in, and like he turns completely coward and, gives all of them guns, and he says, give me, distract them, give me time to get away. And then, on his way out goes, long live the Empire, and it's, I know you and I talked about this, and I know you said you had some issues with the imps, but for me, I thought, first of all, I think it's in keeping with the tone of the movie. This is not Andor, so again, like it's, um, but but I think it's a very valid portrayal of fascism, because I don't think we need reminding that, this sort of, evil comes hand in hand with buffoonery. Um, we don't need to look very far for evidence of that in our world. And so I really enjoyed that, and it made it very, yeah, delicious when Mando took him out. So I'm like, oh, I don't really feel too bad. Yes, I know you guys need the information, but yeah, that asshole needed to go. And I love that he kept passing the buck to other people. I loved it when, like, the Imperial guys were like, we're just pilots. And yeah, so and then he's barking orders to, like, the other guy, and the other guy is basically not saying anything, but his base, the feeling was, shut the hell up. I'm trying to see where this guy's at. And yeah, I don't know. I enjoyed it because I thought, like, they, the Imperials, like, definitely served their purpose in the movie. I think, like, if they were meant to be like the main antagonists for the movie, I would have wanted them to be a bit more, overtly, threatening and scary. But the Hutts are the principal villains of this film. So I don't know. I kind of enjoyed it because, again, it feels like, I think there's just as much validity in this portrayal of, the horrible fascist empire as when we get, like, genuinely scary, incarnations in something like Andor or Maul Shadow Lord. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I mean, the thing is, like, you kind of touched on what I felt, which was like the Imperials in this movie served their purpose. It's just that, and so, like, I didn't think that they were out of place or anything like that. Like, as you said, I think it's incredibly important that we see that, like, people that this evil tyrannical empire can also be, buffoonish and have, like, opportunists and cowards, because that is the way that fascist regimes really work. And, like, and this was a little bit of a step up from something like the Imperials, like Miles, Grint, and Oresco, who were, like, slipping on fruit in season 1 of Rebels. Like, that's kind of like the lowest bar for me when it comes to this kind of stuff. It's just that, like, again, this is a case where, like, Star Wars has set an incredibly high standard for itself and given us some of the most iconic villains in the cinematic history. And, like, when you're measuring up against Darth Vader and Emperor Palpatine / Darth Sidious and Darth Maul and Darth Tyrannus and Orson Krennic and even characters like, Dryden Voss from Solo and Dedra Meero from and Major Cardgaz from Andor, it's like, yeah, Janu Coin and Commander Barrow are kind of down.
Well, I just don't think that they're meant to rise to that level.
They're not, but that doesn't change the fact that it's like yes, like they are Mando since the first half of the movie going after these characters, and as characters in and of themselves, I just didn't find them that interesting. It's more the fact that like they were there to serve the role of the story, and they did that capably. It's just there's not a lot of extra value added there. So that's more what I was talking about when I'm like, I just didn't enjoy the Imperial side of things as much as some of the others. Although it did give us some very good opportunity for one thing. Again, in terms of what they serve, it gave us some great opportunities for action. Because that, again, that opening sequence with Mando is where he's quite brutally, I should note, killing all those stormtroopers. Again, like the fact that the stormtroopers are masked and they're fascist means you can get away with seeing them burned alive, impaled with vibro knives, thrown off cliffs hundreds of feet to their death, shot at point blank range, and we're just like, cool, yay, fun. Even though, like, if it was happening to a character whose face we could see was less evil, it would just be like, that's terrifying, Bam.
I am sort of, I have to admit, I'm a little bit saddened by the fact that the Wilhelm scream has been phased out.
Yeah.
Because there were some great opportunities for it.
Yes. Yeah, I know they technically have a new Wilhelm scream that was like first heard in like the Bad Batch, but I got to be honest, I didn't hear it, so I don't know if they were using that at all. But regardless, it's one of those things where like I actually think it was a telling reminder of Mando's talents and skills, because he is a character who is very proficient with violence. As he says, weapons are part of his religion. And even though we've come to think of him as like, oh, like he's Grogu's daddy and he's super nice and we like him, it's like to these imps, he is a terrifying, unstoppable killing machine. And I do think that kind of one of the interesting themes that this movie does play with is kind of the role of violence and its purpose, because at the start of his arc in the season, Mando was essentially a very cold and not like heartless, but very, efficient bounty hunter. And his iconic line from the opening episode, the "I can bring you in warm or I can bring you in cold," which he repeats to Janu in this movie, which I did enjoy.
Great.
Yeah, but it's telling that like as he became more in concerned with Grogu's welfare, he has evolved in his perspective of what violence can be used for. Like there was kind of an amusing beat when he's talking to Jano in the office on Chikari, where he basically says, "I tried," and Jano's trying to get him to fight in his pits, and he's like, "I try to avoid violence," and it's kind of humorously ironic because we just watched him take out an entire bar full of
I thought that was hilarious.
Thugs, but he is right in the saying that like I no longer believe in violence for violence sake. Like pit fighting is just something that like it's for the blood sport entertainment of these bloodthirsty crowds. And even someone like Rada, who's using the violence as a way to kind of make a name for himself. He has that line like, "At first they booed me and went in the pit because I was Jabba the Son, and they thought that I would be essentially what I would something that I'm not. But then as I started to win and became a champion, they started cheering for me, and they will cheer for me again when I win tomorrow." And then he has that kind of heartbreaking realization when after he fights Mando and Mando beats him, and then the crowd's basically like, "Boo, kill him." It's kind of like that scene from Gladiator where the returning champion, the Tigress of Gaul, he's given all these great victories to the crowd, but as soon as he's on his back, they're just like, "You're just meat for our entertainment, boo, kill him." And of course, much like Maximus in that movie, Din declines to participate in that particular bloodthirsty saving. But I also did so I think that it helps that we're seeing that Mando is essentially learning that his perspective on violence, it's evolved where he's using it essentially for a purpose. And I do love the moment that when he believes, for instance, he's going to die because he can't go with Grogu on the ship, that the tiny Anzellan ship, that he essentially is in that moment thinking that this is going to be his last battle, and he just needs to fight and fight and fight until he can't fight anymore to make sure that his son gets away and is safe. which is why that scene is so emotional. But in particular, but like for someone like the Imperials, like violence is either like a means of control to put their boots on the neck of the galaxy again, or it's for entertainment. And someone like Janu does blend both of that because he is both an Imperial and he's basically a gangster who's running these kind of like bloody fighting pits. So yeah, I did think that was actually one of the thematic ideas that the movie was quite successful with, and it does help that we got to see Mando essentially be quite dangerous and capable, not only in taking out the Imperials, but later basically the droids, kind of the members of the droid Gatra, kind of serve the same purpose. And since you mentioned the droid Gatra, I will just say I always I got a kick out of like basically trying to spot the different types of droids. I'm like, there's a B1 battle droid, there's a super battle droid, there's a KX droid, there's one of those droids with the round head that we like saw in like the Bad Batch and kind of looks a little bit like L3.
It will always just make me so happy anytime I see the, like the Trade Federation battle droids. Like
Yes.
it just because they were so maligned, and
Yes.
like I love them so much.
Yeah. Although we didn't get Matthew Woods voicing these, I think they've had some modifications. Also, I love that there were commando droids in there too from the
Yeah,
Clone Wars. That was really cool. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of highlight that point about the Din's propensity for violence and kind of how it's evolved and how it kind of also reflects on like Rada is trying basically to use violence as a way to escape his past and make a name for himself. But at his core, he's not a violent guy. That's why he's doing what he's doing. He essentially wants to, when he's interacting with Grogu and Din, he's very thoughtful and very gentle. And then when he does have to use the violence, like in the great moment when they're trying to get off Janu's compound, and we see him basically have to, he's tearing through that land speeder ship, and you're like, oh yeah, you would not want to cross paths with a
yeah,
buff.
I love that. Like I did not realize that Zeb line was going to be in the context of Rada. I
I
like
like,
this kid.
yes,
That made me so happy.
yeah,
Um, no, but going back to staying on Shikari for a little bit, let's talk about a certain wonderful turn by a film director, a
hmm
Mr. Marty Scorsese.
yeah,
Which just like I like cracked up when his name was in the opening credits.
I did too.
Part of the cast, I was like, and part of it is because the cast in this movie is relatively small.
Yeah,
Um, but it's just like normally when you get like a famous film director like making, he's got two scenes, so it's a little bit more than a quote unquote cameo, but I don't know, it just warmed my heart considerably, and I enjoyed the character so much. I thought he did such a great job, and like all the more so because it really is just like the middle finger to all those people who would um like set him up to be the enemy of like crowd pleasing, you know,
yeah,
spectacle movies. It's like, no, it's not his flavor of cinema. And he is going to, stand up for, being able to make the kinds of movies that he likes to go see. Like, but you don't like agree to have a part, of a, how many arms does he have? A
uh,
four-armed, you know, monkey alien. um if you completely despise this kind of stuff, so it's like it was just wonderfully cathartic, as a middle finger to, you know to a lot of those types, and
yes.
and he was a lot of fun in the part.
Yes, and I love the fact that he's, an Argentinian and his name is Hugo, like Martin says it is
Yep.
Hugo Durant, which is Rio Durant's name, like Jon Favreau's character from Solo. With I think the implication they've said as they're supposed to be cousins, because it turns out Ardinians have a big family. He's got like 12 little ones running around at home. Yes, but I did love the fact that yes, not only was his name like prominently listed in the opening credits as like the fourth or fifth build character, but yes, it was the fact it's like legendary director Martin Scorsese, who the obnoxious film Twitter title basically hold like this man is a god of cinema and he is our champion against these terrible blockbuster films. And he's like, yeah, my buddy Jon Favreau wants me to be in a Star Wars movie as an alien. I'll do it. I bet they were like, no, you cannot sully yourself with this. And he's like, that's fun. I love it. And the character himself actually does he was kind of remarkably like, even though he's again only in basically the two scenes, one, he's very funny. And two, he's empathetic because he is a sign of like the guy who's basically just trying to do right by his family and make a living, but these criminal syndicates and the empire, it's ultimately revealed, are basically making it impossible by demanding exorbitant tribute and threatening his livelihood. And so he is like, it seems like he's resisting helping Mando, it's because he's scared, and this is kind of what they're standing up for, what they're fighting.
Can we just like take a minute to appreciate the fact that that Marty Scorsese playing a four-armed alien, scared of getting in trouble with the local mafia.
Yeah. Yes, I think that was delicious. Probably. That was delicious, and I also love that he's a cook, and that sandwich he was making, that like flat meat sandwich, actually looked pretty damn good for Star Wars food. And of course, Jon Favreau is famous for loving to cook and having that history of like not only in the movie Chef, but he had that cooking show, and it's like I bet it was a very like deliberate choice. Every aspect of that character and his oeuvre was definitely chosen very deliberately. And yeah, the piece of music on the track where it just says it's called Hugo Durant's Snack Shack, which I'm just like,
I love that track so much.
Yes.
And then it plays in full during the end credits of the movie too. I love the fact that the character's name is Hugo, because again, like taken from Martin Scorsese's like most like accessible movie for children.
Yep.
Which again, it's like, get over yourselves, film Twitter types. So even though like Hugo was as a film was enormously well received by critics and all that, so it's okay for Martin Scorsese to make a movie for kids, but apparently Star Wars can't.
Mm-hmm.
And we can talk a little bit more about Rada, because you've touched on it. Like, I really just love that scene where Grogu rushes through the bars and Mando's like, Grogu, no, and he's like, and Rada's like, man, it's all right. I'm not my father. And it just like, what a just beautifully like tender performance, as fierce as Rada can get. Like, there's just like so much that's very identifiable about someone who doesn't want to be defined by his by who his father was and his past, and he's just trying to, he doesn't want to be involved in that life, and all he wants to do is live a life of his choosing, and his and his aunt and uncle want to kill him.
Yeah.
And it's I thought it was really wonderful. I loved his just his moments with Mando and Grogu, and like, and then at the end when he tells Grogu, like, take care of your old man, he's one of the good ones. And it just, and then that image of him playing with Grogu on the beach halfway through the movie was just so beautifully tender. And like, again, nothing about that like feels safe to me as a movie choice.
Yeah.
So again, but I just thought like all that was really good and like and again like you could be forgiven for going to this movie thinking that the choice to bring Rada the Hutt as, as a buff a buff Hutt fighter would be a disastrous decision. Even I remember I was like, you sure you want to do this? But like it just worked so absolutely brilliantly, and in retrospect just like endears me even more to that plot line from the Clone Wars film, and I'm always gonna smile just a little more when I see little Stinky in
Yeah.
in that film, and I just thought he was such a great addition to this movie, um and yeah, well I don't think like I know you said like for you he was like the most emotional thing in this movie. I tend to go with Mando and Grogu's relationship being sort of the heart of the story, but I think he is definitely one of the beating hearts of this movie, and just I don't know, just bravo to both Favreau and Filoni for for executing something that at first glance seems to be, dare I say, lunacy, and making it work so wonderfully.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's a textbook example of like it's not always like what is it like what is it? It's like how it's about it, because essentially,
Yeah,
yes, the idea of the buff hut like could very easily be played for a joke, and that there was a route where this movie could have just made Rada basically like a manosphere like MMA bro type hut, and that probably would not have been very rewarding beyond just kind of the fun of seeing a jacked hut fight a Mandalorian. But the character just surprised and defied those expectations, because it is kind of a truth that uh, for certain types of people, like when people think about the Hutts, like Jabba looms so large, no pun intended, over the entire concept of Hutts as a species. And most of the Hutts that we've seen, even in things like the Clone Wars, have been gangsters. That we have a tendency to basically just pay, yeah, the entire species is kind of on the shady side. And it's like, we don't have to assume that. Like, we shouldn't judge all the Hutts by the same cover, even the Jabba the Hutt's son. Funnily enough, Rada actually reminded me very much of a character from Star Wars Visions and the short Tatooine Rhapsody, the G the Hutt, who like just wants to be a rocker, man. He just wants to play his music and have fun. He doesn't want to be a criminal boss. And Rada is kind of similar. He essentially, his father Jabba the Hutt loved him clearly, and that's the whole point of the Clone Wars movie is Jabba wants his son, his Punky Muffin, back home safe. But Jabba was clearly an evil character who did a lot of terrible things, and that would have had an effect on Rada growing up. Like, and how would he have responded to that? Would he have thought like, well, I need to be big, I need to be evil like my dad so I can gain his respect, and that's the only way to make my way in this galaxy, or can I forge my path another way? And like when he loses his father, like he decides that I don't want to be part of this legacy. I want to forge my own path. And I found it just so rewarding, again, not only that he was, essentially had a mind of his own, but also that he is one of those characters who like sees the value in, companionship and gentleness and, empathy for other characters. It was actually kind of a really beautiful moment when he asked like if he can feed Grogu, and Grogu just runs to him and trusts him immediately. And that's how you know he's good, because you're like, Grogu's kind of like a dog in that way. If he likes a character, you're like, we know they're all right. And then yeah, like the moments when he's playing with Grogu on the beach, or talking with Din about like kind of his life and what he'll do with it now that he's free. And also the fact that yes, it like he tries to go off and have his own life, and then his aunt and uncle basically send Embo after him and drag him back, and they're basically like, we're gonna not just kill you, we're gonna torture you for hundreds of years just for daring to not be what we think you should be. And then he breaks free. He just gets to kind of roar with defiance of like, no, you were trying to bring me down to your level, and I will, I refuse to join you, and I will fight you for my right to self-determine.
When he wakes up and immediately notices that Grogu's in danger, and just the way he roars, "Leave him alone!" It
Yeah.
just like, oh,
yeah,
so good. I love characters for whom like they don't have like this big sort of ulterior agenda, or they're not schemers. They just want to be kind to others and to live a good life, and to see that in the form of a hut just made him even more endearing. And
yes,
and yeah, I just, and again, like I said, there is some like, from a sort of fan perspective, there is also a vindication of like seeing that character executed in this way and taken seriously, and after sort of being a punchline for so many years. It's kind of a, I don't think like, you know it's more so for a particular subset of Star Wars fans, because like Rada the Hutt is not someone who's as well known as like a Jar Jar Binks or something, but it's like, but I am glad that like the character has now gotten his opportunity to be in the limelight, and to like, I don't think the character needed redemption. He was just supposed to be a cute baby. But it is sort of validating, just for those of us who are okay with the sort of kooky, weird side of Star Wars.
yeah, and as you say, it's validating not only for those of us who love and value that, but also in terms of like the character of Rada, where he started, and what we saw in the Clone Wars, which was Ahsoka Tano and Anakin Skywalker, risking a lot to save his life and bring him back to his father. And if he had grown up, they were doing that obviously because they needed Jabba's help with the war, but like it would have definitely been a different feeling if it was like they do all that and then he grows up to be just as terrible as his father was, and you're like, well, maybe that was a mistake. But instead it's like, no, Rada was not his father. Even though he grew up under his influence, he decided to make a better choice. And at the end, he decides he wants to join the New Republic, and just as he said, stay and help out. And I love the fact that it's a kind of a subtle moment, but basically the idea that like, Mando kind of makes the little joke. He's like, I'm not sure if they'll have a uniform that will fit you. And then Zeb comes up to him and is basically like, yeah, we have something. I think I have something that would fit your size. Implying again that the Republic, the New Republic at its best, is a welcoming place for people of all backgrounds and sizes.
Oh, he
and
probably has his father's uniform.
Yeah.
Because he was best friends with Jabba the Hutt, lest we forget.
Yeah. yeah. And then and we see just kind of the wonderful visual sight gag of the fact that here at the New Republic base, yes, we have this massive jacked hut, and then we have the tiny little Anzellans who are wandering around. They're just like, hey, big guy, and that all are welcome here, and this is what they're fighting for.
Oh my god, like, and this is a great transition, because let's talk about the Anzellans.
I love them so much.
I am in love with them, and and even though as well documented, I have numerous issues with the Rise of Skywalker, but Babu Frick was never one of those issues. I have loved him since the moment I first saw him, and then when we got more Anzellans in The Mandalorian, and now they make their appearance on the once again on the big screen in this film, I was like, yes. And they were by far one of the most popular things at my showing of the movie.
Mhm.
People were loving the Anzellans. Um, and like I swear to like I think one of the best, like one of my favorite all-time sight gags now is the shots of making it look like it's a big ship, and then and then the cut to them all being crowded in this tiny little
Uh,
it's
no,
such so great. I
it
love
was.
this.
It was. It's like, and it's one of those things that like you don't necessarily think about, but it makes absolute perfect sense. It's like they're tiny little guys. They have a tiny little ship. We've never seen anything like that in Star Wars, but it makes perfect sense. And just like them, it is adorable.
Yeah,
And this is, this is an opportunity to shout out the absolutely wonderful performer Shirley Henderson, who not only performed and voiced Babu Frick in The Rise of Skywalker, but returned to do that for the Yenzel and Droid Spiss in The Mandalorian, and now in this movie. And I loved seeing her name in the opening credits as
yes.
well, because what she has done, not only is the puppetry like immaculate, but just the what she's done with like the Anzellans and their voice patterns and the speak pattern is some of like the greatest and most joyful comedy in all of Star Wars. This moment when, of course, Grogu is delighted to see him and runs over, and they're like, "No, no, 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 bad baby," just because again, like Grogu thinks they're adorable too, and he just wants to hug and squeeze them. They're like, "We got work to do, kid." But then I loved seeing their bond actually with Grogu throughout the movie. Like, yes, they're riding in the little speeder, and of course, like they come with Grogu because when Grogu loses Din and wants to go rescue him, the Anzellans join him because they have also lost a member. Which I will just note, that was the moment in the movie I was probably the closest to yelling at the screen when Embo and his Anuba arrive, and the shot was in the trailer where like the Anuba starts growling and one of the little Anzellans is screaming. But then when we actually see like the Anzellan in the Anuba's mouth, and I was like, "Don't you dare do not, bad dog." And fortunately, the dog, the Anuba, just wanted to use the Anzellan as a little chew toy and play with it. But if he had actually taken that bite, like I don't know what I would have done. I would have been so.
And this is again like I go back to like the whole get off your high horse thing to so many people coming into this movie. It's like this is the type of movie where the Anzellan is only going to be used as a chew toy. He's not going to be eaten by the menacing alien dog, you know. And and I just loved it then when Mando tricks him and has the Anzellan like scurry over behind the bars. Like it was just all so adorable.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, no, it's like no, like no harm was going to come to the little Anzellans. That would have just been too much. We can watch the horrible Imperials get burned alive, but don't you dare do anything to the Anzellans.
Yes.
Um,
No. Yeah, and it was just like, yeah, such a relief when he scurried into the cage and he did a little run for freedom, and I was very invested, like, get in there. And then when they reunite on Nal Hutta and they have the little Anzellan like group hug, and you're just like, I could die. And then when they're helping Grogu with his infiltration of the base, and it's just you're getting all these wonderful Anzellan things, like when they're infiltrating through the pipe, and you just like pipe, huh? and then when Grogu
and
shoots the paintball at the rat,
nice
and
shot, baby.
good shot, baby.
I've
But
loved that since that first teaser trailer, and I loved it just as much in the actual movie. Um, and again, that's like when that first teaser came out and people watched it, they were like, "Oh, it's just kiddie stuff," and I'm like, "Just fucking get over yourself." Yeah, it's fun, it's cute, it's something that kids are gonna love. I loved it too, so yeah.
yeah.
Um, and speaking of when, like, yeah, when when that Anzellan is placed into danger. We have the character of Enbo,
Yes.
which is just another wonderful treat for us animation fans who like doesn't, if you don't know who it is, it's fine. He just works as an intimidating bounty hunter, you know, and a great sort of foil for Mando. But like I remember when he first showed up in one of the trailers, I was like, oh shit, and yeah, it was just so great, you know. We you know, he's an antagonist in this, you know, he's for hire, you know, he's, you know,
Yeah.
not always gonna be helping out the poor defenseless, you know, farmers. but you know, but in the end he doesn't, you know, he doesn't stick his neck out to, you know, to save the hut, so he ends in a fairly good place for me. And but no, it was just so great. I loved it. And again, there's just so much about this movie that felt like a love letter to like all the wonderful corners of Star Wars, to which I am, you know, such a big fan. And so to see him there was just a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, I mean, from the moment that he showed up in the trailer, and there, it's like the menacing approach, and the torrential rain and the lightning coming down, and you're just like, oh yeah, like not only like yay, it's Embo, but it's just like this is a reminder of just what a freaking badass he is. And that was really kind of how he was portrayed. You know, the fact that, as you said, like I don't even know if we get the character's name spoken aloud, so like you don't need to know his history. He can just be an incredibly dangerous foil. But those of us who have known him from the Clone Wars, like we love this character. He's one of the coolest designs in all of Star Wars, and I particularly love the fact that even though they don't go quite as over the top with it as they do in the Clone Wars, where you know he's using his hat like as a projectile weapon, or like a snowboard, like he makes use of it. Like when Mando brings down the roof and he collapses in, he's using his hat as a shield, and I do love the fact that like we spent the entire movie building up how dangerous and capable Din is, and then we introduce a foe, an Embo, who can handle him, who beats him,
Yeah.
who drags him to against his will off to the huts at Nal Hutta. And of course, as soon as that happens, you're like, they've got to have a rematch later in the fight, and then they do, and that fight kicks ass.
Yeah.
So it was a delight, and yes, I was very glad that Embo did not die, and that he was basically like, yeah, fuck this, I'm not fighting the dragon stake for these huts. They paid me well, but I'm gonna leave. Me and my dog are gonna leave now.
Yeah, it was like don't pull a you know, Book of Boba Fett with me, where you're gonna bring in this badass bounty hunter, you know, from animation, only to like kill him. And in that case, I still hold out some hope. But still, I was like, no, let him get away, and you know, and live to fight another day. So yeah, um, I was just so happy, and which, you know, and so talking about like uh some more about, actually, before I go into, I was going to move over to talking about the Hut twins, but first I just want to, you know, spend a brief moment talking about how'd you feel the fact that we got to go back to Navarro for a little interlude in the movie.
Well, I really liked it because it was kind of established as Mando's home base. I will acknowledge, I was a little bummed that we didn't really see as much of it in terms of like, other than the Anzellans, obviously, who are a bigger role, like that we didn't get to see some of the characters we know there. In particular, it doesn't like it's not a demerit against the movie, but I thought that the movie missed an opportunity to have a little tribute to the late great Carl Weathers here. because, unfortunately, he passed away after season 3 of The Mandalorian, and so we knew that he wasn't going to be in this film. But I just kind of had it in my mind that like there will be some kind of tribute to him somewhere in the film, and then there just wasn't. Which again is just one of those things. Like the movie wasn't under no obligation to do that, but I just thought it might have been nice. But like I said, it's not the point of the movie, and the scenes we do get on Navarro. Not only of the other thing I loved about Navarro was that we saw that Din still has his N1 starfighter, because as soon as we saw that he's getting the Razor Crest in the trailer, which makes sense because Rada the Hutt ain't fitting in the N1 starfighter. I was like, but I hope we at least get some acknowledgement that it's still there, because it's such a cool ship, and its introduction in the Book of Boba Fett is still just one of the most joyful, fun things that I've in recent Star Wars memory. And so I liked that we see that, yes, he still has it. He's just not using it right now because he has the Razor Crest, which suits his bounty hunting needs more. But yeah, Navarro was a fun sequence, particularly again the Anzellans and the Embo fight. It's just that again, it's one of those things where because you don't need to have essentially seen any of the Mandalorian episodes in order to watch this movie. It means we don't get a nod to Carl Weathers' Grief Cargo. We don't see IG-12, and it's just like it is what it is.
Yeah. I did wonder if we were going to see, I don't know. I still call him IG-11 because.
Oh yeah, he is IG-11 now. That's right. Yeah. IG-12 is the kind of the vehicle that Grogu uses, the yes no thing, and he is IG-11 again by the end of the show. You're right.
Yeah, I will say that even though we don't get a sort of more overt nod to Carl Weathers in Navarro, there is if you go on StarWars.com's website to the trivia about the movie, it says a sign above the doorway leading to the Djarik Arena says Weathers Apollo, in a homage to the late grief card actor Carl Weathers, who famously portrayed Apollo Creed in the Rocky franchise.
Okay, so it kind of was there. It just wasn't in the place we were expecting.
Yeah. But yeah, I thought it was nice because I kind of liked that the movie allowed us to have like these moments in like locales that were established in the show, and like this is where he and Grogu live, and because there is a tendency just to completely like do completely new stuff when you take a TV show to the big screen. So I kind of liked it. It felt wonderful, and I just loved seeing the blurs, which just warmed my heart so much because, speaking of homages to characters, that was, such a wonderful homage to, oh God,
Wheel.
Queel. And that made me smile. So yeah, I was happy about that. But now we can move on to, talking about the Hutt twins, who like, and they are the principal villains of the movie, and like I just thought they worked so well. I loved them when they appeared in the Book of Boba Fett, and now we realize that was just a taste of what we're getting. I thought they were deliciously twisted and evil, and like, and yeah, what they are doing to Rada, like the Hutts certainly have this thing about torturing their enemies over the course of like thousands of years. And yeah, and the fact, like, when they know what's going to really piss off Din Djarin is, removing his helmet, because they know what that means. And I just love the moment where they're like, you will be cast out, forever. And and of course, because we're not as you said, we're making this accessible for everybody. So it's like he's not going to go into the detailed history and be like, "I've already been through this shit." Okay, uh, but instead he just says, "Not if I kill you,"
Yeah.
which I thought was so great. And yeah, no, I just thought they were wonderful. It's not like the big sort of, it's not villains on the scale of like the Empire and the Emperor and Darth Vader and all that. But again, I felt like the twins were very much in the vein of the level of evil that we get in like Solo, a Star Wars story.
Mhm.
And I like seeing these corners of like the Star Wars universe and Star Wars villainy in like a big screen setting, to kind of show that it doesn't always have to be like, and even though it's on the table for this specific movie, we're not dealing with like the big war or the end of the world states, and it's about these gangsters want to harm their their nephew, and also to get revenge they're going to also harm Mando and his son. And it's just, I like that the movie ends up in a place where, okay, we can run and they'll end up chasing after us, or we can stand and and end their tyranny and save uh and save Rada. And like it's it obviously is going to have ramifications, bigger than that. They were playing both sides, and so they were also helping out, you know, the the fledgling empire, and and so, but the states are very personal, and I think that's what made them so wonderfully threatening as villains, is that they are threatening the lives of these characters that we care about. And I just love having Hutts as villains. It goes back to being such a big, huge fan of Return of the Jedi as a kid, and yeah, this big giant slug, and now we've got you know two of them, three and counting Rada, including Rada, and also the fact that how far they've come with the CGI for the Hutts. I talked about this when we talked about the Book of Boba Fett. I think over on
Here be
I
dragons. Yeah.
on Here Be Dragons. Like, it's just amazing of what they can do now, and so to see them on the big screen executed in this fashion was just really cool. And so yeah, I really enjoyed them as villains. And like, my only disappointment, like, they deserve to go, but the only twinge of disappointment is I thought that they were really good villains, and it would have been intriguing to keep them around for the future. But I thought like they had a wonderful story and were dispatched in a great way, where it's like, nope, you can't rely on the sketchy bounty hunter,
Yeah.
who also sorry, go ahead.
No, go finish what you were going to say.
No, who also has a tendency to, like, he's going to do the job he's hired for, but he also has a history of doing the right thing. And in that moment, he didn't view it as in his best interest to
Yeah.
save the evil villains.
Yes, and also you may keep a giant albino dragon snake as a pet and feed it, but that does not mean it is going to show loyalty to you if you find yourself in its coils. It will eat you too.
Yep.
And I do really, and we can talk more about the dragon snake in a minute, but just on the twins,
Yeah.
yeah, when I talked about the fact that I had some issues with the villains of the movie, that doesn't really extend to the twins. I thought that they were very capable, even though, as you said, they're not on the level of someone like Darth Vader or the Empire or Emperor or Darth Maul. Like, they are on the level of basically someone like Jabba the Hutt, who has kind of like lower ambitions than to dominate the entire galaxy, but still capable of being every bit as cruel and twisted and, causing suffering. And these Hutts, this kind of I love them in the Book of Boba Fett just because they thought they were such a cool concept of these kind of this brother sister duo who seem very kind of like codependent with each other. The fact that like they are always curled up and coiled around each other, and they sleep next to each other, and they're like, I don't
We
really
definitely
know.
got. I think this had already been answered off screen, but it was finally answered to my satisfaction that they are not actually conjoined.
Yeah, they are not conjoined, but there's definitely, I did wonder, like, do we have the Jamie and Cersei Hutts going on here? And I will just note that in their palace, it certainly seems like there's some freaky shit going on with the other Hutts who live there. Because when Din and Grogu were entering, and there were a bunch of, I was like, is that a Hutt orgy? Actually, no. Move along. I don't want to see that. But in particular, the twins are the kind of villains who, they really are, as Din says, like monsters and bullies, and representing, again, because we get a Hutt of like Rada who is empathetic and kind and kind of defies our expectation of what we have come to think of the Hutts are. It's more effective because we have the twins who are basically exactly what we expect from the worst of the Hutt species. And the fact that they have this relationship with Rada where they're technically family, but they just only see him as a threat and want to kill him and then make him suffer because he is, essentially not living up to their ideas of what a Hutt should be. And they're menacing too. Like, in the Book of Boba Fett, like, I thought that their scenes were very cool, but the fact that, like, they do show up and they have that great confrontation with Boba, but then when they were in the Pikes are coming, they're like, actually, we're going back to Nal Hutta, and so sorry about all that assassination attempt earlier, and we're going to give you a Rancor to as kind of recompense. And here they are like, they're really menacing to Din, where they're essentially mocking him for having removed his helmet, and then when they're taunting him and Grogu and Rada, basically like, you will suffer, and then it will be his turn. And that's really what did, like, Pedro Pascal's face here, just when he's looking at them with just such like anger and hate and contempt, because he's like, he double crossed them, and so he always recognized that there was this danger. But like, the fact of the matter is that this is the kind of like Boba Fett in the Book of Boba Fett. He's like, I used to work for these kind of people, and now I want nothing to do with you, because I just think that you're like, you don't have a moral compass at all. So yes, they served. They definitely served the role of this movie's antagonists very well. And not only was their fight with Rod, like, again, something we never would have thought to have seen in a Star Wars movie before. Like, not only will we see a Hutt fighting in a gladiatorial arena, we will see a full-on brawl between three gigantic Hutts, and then they will fall into a dragon snake pit, and two of the Hutts will be eaten by this monstrous thing, kind of like in the vein of the Rancor. So yeah, I was a little sad to see them go, as you said, because it's kind of, they were compelling villains, but somebody had to bite the bullet for everything that they did, and it was like, if they were going to go, that was a fitting recompense.
Yeah, I very much enjoyed watching them get eaten whole.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to talk about the elephant in the room. Are we satisfied with the amount of Pedro helmetless that we saw?
Kind of. It's one of those things where it's just, we accept this now as a truth of the character, that yes, Pedro Pascal does the voice for the Din Djarin, and he has removed his helmet to give us some very emotionally impactful scenes, like the famous scene where he says goodbye to Grogu at the end of season 2. But the majority of the time, it is not him in the suit. It's just not. It's usually Brendan Wayne for when the character is just kind of walking and having conversations. And I believe Brendan Wayne does the onset dialogue, which is then ADR'd over by Pedro. And then it's usually Lateef Crowder for some of the more complex fight scenes. And I have really appreciated that they have now started to embrace that, and Brendan Wayne and Lateef Crowder have prominent places in the credits. Because they are part of the Mandalorian. But Pedro Pascal is also one of the most charismatic and talented actors we have working in Hollywood today, and we desperately want to, see him actually get a chance to portray this character. And the fact of the matter is that, because he didn't remove his helmet at all in season 3, or in the Book of Boba Fett, and in this case, I thought that they take it off right in the trailer, and so I'm like, at least we know we're getting some Pedro. And it is a good scene where he essentially has the moment where, to face down the Hutts, and he has that big fight against both the Amani and the Dragon Snake helmetless. But when the Hutt twins kind of give him back his helmet, there was a small part of me like, don't do that. It's gonna put it back on. Because I do think that it would. This is a point that Alex Damon from Star Wars Explained has made, and which I do kind of agree with, even though I just accept it as part of the character, is like there is a large part of us who basically would think that a way to show Din Djarin's evolution as a character would be for him to not be so rigid about the helmet rule, and to recognize that you can still be a Mandalorian while taking it off and not have to go back and bathe in the minds of Mandalore, or kill all your enemies whenever they see you without it. But I also embrace that it's important to him to honor this part of the Mandalorian creed, and this is the conceit of the character. This is unfortunately where the behind the scenes kind of bleeds into the fantasy, where it's just part of the reason that they do this the way that they can is so that they cannot have Pedro Pascal on the set all the time, and they don't have to pay him as much. It is what it is. And so I thought that we got enough Pedro, but I will be lying if I said I wanted more. I definitely.
I think this comes down to you have to separate what you want from the actor,
Yeah.
to the character himself.
Yeah.
And the character of Din Djarin, that is a very important part of being a Mandalorian to him. And we can disagree with that philosophy, but it's his choice. And so my own, if I could have changed anything, it would have just, maybe it's because the Anzellans had to see Din Djarin. He's not trying to kill the Anzellans. But I kind of would have liked for them to figure out a way where he's without the helmet while Grogu's taking care of him.
Yeah.
And then when he wakes up and they make the choice to go back, then there could have been this dramatic moment of him putting the helmet back on. And it would, I think that would have been cool, but I'm sure they had the reasons for why they didn't do that. It's not a major thing for me. It's just one of those things where I'm it kind of feels like, okay, we've got to have Pedro without the helmet on just because it's a big movie. So we'll just okay, he's had it off for 5 minutes here. We can check that off. And then we can move on. So I just would have liked it to be a bit more tied into the drama of what the character was going through for the next section of the movie, and have it be a big sort of moment when he put it back on, as opposed to, okay, you've had it off for long enough, put it back on. And again, it is not a big issue for me, but it's just I have my own sort of battle to fight with my desire to see Pedro Pascal act and emote with his face versus the character of Din Djarin. And so but I think it does come down to that, it's okay for, fans to want to see one of their favorite actors, fully. But also don't lose sight of who the character is.
Yeah.
And and just because you think that Din shouldn't care about the helmet doesn't mean that that's the way it should be. It's important to Din. And so yeah.
Yeah, no, and I made my peace with that in The Mandalorian season 3, where I think at that point, like he starts that season, he goes to the mines of Mandalore to get redeemed for the terrible sin of having removed his helmet so he could say goodbye to his beloved son. But then I did wonder at the end of that season if like when he was captured by Moff Gideon, if something was going to happen where Gideon was going to take his helmet off and maybe he would realize, you know what, I actually don't need to be this. But as you said, that's just not what the character is, and it's not the way that they're telling the story, and it's not the way that they're using Pedro. And I'm like, okay, I get it. And so the sequence that we have here, as I said, I like your idea that like maybe if there could have been a way for him to still have the helmet off when he was being cared for by Grogu, and then he can put it back on when they're ready to go fight.
Yeah.
But that's not what the movie did, and I just have to again acknowledge that Pedro Pascal is as I said one of one of our most best and most brilliant actors working. He's done iconic roles in The Last of Us. He was great in the Fantastic Four movie. His contributions to The Mandalorian, I think I think he gives a great vocal performance, and anytime his helmet's off, he does wonderful with the character. But when people think about Pedro Pascal as the Mandalorian, I always want to say like he is kind of a creation of 3 actors, not
Yeah.
just one. And like
Which is why I'm
overlooking, yeah, Brendan Wayne and Lateef Crowther need to receive the credit that they are due.
which is why I'm glad they were so prominent in the opening credits of the movie. I thought that was just great.
Yes.
I'd love to see the evolution there. Um, but oh, what else? Where was I going to go to with that next? I don't remember. It'll come to me. But we can spend a minute just talking about the awesome creatures in this in this whole sequence. Um, I just like again, it's so gloriously pulpy, and I just love seeing, like this is just such a freaking incredible, awesome image.
Mhm.
I mean, it really does look like, something out of like you'd see out of like one of those old classic fantasy magazines or something. Um, and yeah, I just I loved it. It was so much fun, um, and yes, it's something that like I feel like I talked a lot earlier on in the stream about like how fun this movie is, but I think something that maybe as we've sort of delved deep into like the characters and and all that stuff, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that like all the great like you know creature designs and the kinetic action, it's just like this is just like a wonderfully fun roller coaster of a movie. And so when you get to scenes like this, there's just something very oh god, what's the word I'm looking for, um just a thrill that you get from seeing this giant snake come out of the water. And it's just like, oh my god, it's so wonderfully like just diving into that love of creatures that Star Wars, had since its inception. And you know as much as again, as much as I adore something like Andor, that they dial back a lot on that stuff in that show. And there is just something about seeing our main character facing down this giant, you know snake-like creature that like just thrills me and and just makes me feel like a kid again. And yeah, I just thought it was so much fun.
No, it's one of those things where this is just like the pulpy weirdness that I love so much in Star Wars, like at its apex.
I
I
guess
hey, hey Cassie, because so I know some people get frustrated with certain recurring tropes in Star Wars movies. I tend to really enjoy a lot of them, and one of my favorite Star Wars tropes is that in almost every Star Wars movie, I think with the exception of like Revenge of the Sith and The Last Jedi, one of the staples is that there's a sequence where our intrepid heroes have to fight and almost get eaten by some kind of gigantic creature. And this is absolutely in that vein, and it's great because and the dragon snake is a creature that we've seen. It's a dragon snake in The Empire Strikes Back that almost eats R2D2 and then spits him out on Dagobah. Smaller one, we don't really see it, and then they're in the on now Hutta in the Clone Wars when Obi-Wan and Quinlan go there. But we've never seen one this big. We've never seen an albino dragon snake, and we've never seen them be quite this vicious, which is made it just a really thrilling fight. And it's one of those things where, like, yes, Din is an incredibly capable warrior, but like he is outmatched here, and the best he can hope to do is hold the creature off long enough to escape. And if Grogu and the Anzellans hadn't come, then he probably would have died, unfortunately, in this contest. But that makes it all the more rewarding that like we know that when the dragon snake comes back at the end to give the twins their comeuppance, it feels like, you know what, the dragon snake just wanted a dinner, and he didn't get it with Din, but now he gets it with the twins, and they're a better meal anyway. But in the similar vein, because you can almost forget because the dragon snake is so cool. Before the dragon snake ever shows up, we get the actually almost probably even scarier sequence with the Amani guards that are in the water, where they are like, that was another great callback because obviously the Amani are in Return to the Jedi as guards in Jabba's palace, but they don't really do much. I had forgotten this. They actually are part of one of those unfinished Clone Wars arcs, the Crystal Crisis on Utapau, where there was supposed to be a sequence where they were used much more like this as kind of like dangerous cavern dwellers that our heroes have to face. But in this movie, they are very dangerous and very scary. Not only in this sequence where Pedro is having to fight them in the water and can't really see them, and I was definitely getting a little bit of claustrophobia anytime he was having to get pulled under the water and you don't know where these creatures are. But then, of course, they do come back later where, like, when they go to explore the ship and you're just like, there's going to be a jump scare. There's going to be a jump scare. There's going to be a jump scare. We're ready for it. There's going to be a jump scare. Oh, my God. Come on. But Din handles them because, again, he's a badass.
Oh God. Yeah, it's just it was just one of my real thrills because okay, so I'm going to be honest here. Like you and I have had the discussion in the past of sort of like, you know, pulpy Star Wars versus not so pulpy Star Wars. And sometimes I have almost felt in the past like it's becomes like an either or, like you know, do we get like the pulpy Star Wars or do we get like the Star Wars with like, you know, gravitas and you know and all that stuff. And one of the big reasons why I loved Maul Shadow Lord so much, I mean, well, one of many reasons, but like was the fact that I felt it did a really good job of blending those two things. But also like I love Star Wars pulp, but also like I think it can, you know, I think that's one of the things that like comes up in our sort of disagreements about Rise of Skywalker because, you know, I don't have an issue with like how pulpy the movie is. It's just that there's also some other, uh, elements of it that I just execution wise that I think don't work, the best. And so, but it always kind of feels like it sounds like I'm, against pulpy Star Wars, when we have those conversations when it's not really. And so that's why, like, for this movie, which works better for me in terms of its execution, but there is so much pulp in it with the creatures and the ideas and the settings and you know eh, and so it just brings me a lot of joy because I get to give myself over to the fun and silly side of Star Wars in a way that I feel like I don't know if I always get to because I have lots of different I like many different kinds of Star Wars and so sometimes it's like it almost feels contradictory sometimes when I talk about I'll wax poetic about Andor and how it's just like one of my favorite things and then that makes it sound like I'm that my allegiance is to the the adult gritty Star Wars, but in actuality, as fans, many of us are complicated and we like different flavors of Star Wars. And I think sometimes that gets lost because, oh no, you've got to pick a side, right? And so I think what was so joyous about so much of this movie was I just got to revel in my love of this particular kind of Star Wars where it's just you know, given into that the fun and whimsy, that I love so much. That's the kid in me who watched Return of the Jedi, who there was a long stretch of my youth where if you asked me what my favorite Star Wars movie was, I would without hesitation have said Return of the Jedi. And so that version of me was just like so overjoyed and happy watching this movie in the theaters and so with all this stuff with the creatures and the monsters and the silliness um and the fun I felt really well fed watching this movie because of those aspects um and I don't know, I can't remember the last time that I came home from a movie and I was just like, you know, it was well into the evening after I'd come home from seeing the movie. And I said to my dad, I was like, I'm just in such a good mood because I had such a fun time with that movie.
Yeah. No, I mean that's why I love the pulpy weirdness in Star Wars because it is fun and it is a reminder that this is a fantasy story where characters are going on profound emotional heroes journeys, but then also like there's still room for like the fantastical and for imaginations to run wild. It's one of the reasons the Jabba's palace sequence is so iconic is because that is probably in the original trilogy where the most just kind of pulpy, craziness that we see in a concentrated sequence. But I always think the best Star Wars movies strike a balance where, like, yes, like Empire Strikes Back is incredibly grounded and dark and serious, but it also has Luke almost getting eaten by a giant snow yeti monster in the Wampa, and the Tauntauns, and everything that happens on Dagobah with Yoda, the little green puppet, who is also the source of the most profound wisdom. And like one of the reasons I adore Rise of Skywalker so much is because it embraces that pulpy side of Star Wars so warmly and so completely, while also, I think, delivering some of the most emotionally profound lessons in any Star Wars movie. So I'm like, you can do both. And that's one of the reasons why for something like Andor, like, even though I was in love with the characters and the development and the themes of it, I was kind of missing that element in this story, and that's why I latched onto Dewey and Freedy like a drowning man when they appeared, where I was just like, see, it's still here, there's less of it, but it's still here. And this movie really just kind of gets to revel in it, like it is kind of maybe it's too much for some people's taste, but it's a reminder that like Star Wars is a massive, big galaxy, and there are entire sequences where even though Din Djarin is human, he is behind a mask. So there are long stretches of this movie where there are no human characters present, and it still is able to like move us and thrill us. And it's like, this is why like you shouldn't be scared of this stuff, guys. Like it might. Yes, there are certain people who will just not engage with that element of the story because they think it's not serious enough. But frankly, that's their problem, and that's them. I'm just going to be rather blunt. I think that that's an incredibly facile and intellectually shallow way to look at storytelling. So I always appreciate it when people can actually see the depth and the profound in something that might seem a little weird, because again, a character like Yoda, we just take it for granted that he is the most profound source of wisdom in the Star Wars galaxy, but he's also a little green Muppet. And they pulled that off. And if you're willing to work a little bit harder, you can find that power here. And I think this movie really does embrace that telling. So in addition to, again, just being a riotous good time.
Yeah, yeah, you're in reference to the people who like sort of fear to give themselves over to something that in their eyes is more like childish. I always go back to one of my favorite quotes of all time, which is by C.S. Lewis. When I became a man, I put away childish things, including the fear of childishness and the desire to be very grown up.
Yes.
And I feel like that is something that a lot of people still need to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. So, and you were mentioning like scenes shared entirely by non-humans, which brings me to this wonderful character, the what do we call him?
So
This,
apparently his name is Gatori,
okay.
Gatori, voiced by the great. Actually, I'm blanking on the name. I'll pull it up here. Voiced by the great Stephen McKinley Henderson.
Yeah,
And
I thought I saw his name in the credits, but I couldn't find it online the other day. So I'm very like I thought that it sounded like him too. So I'm very happy to hear that. I love this character so much because again, this felt like something ripped from the Clone Wars,
yeah,
and it was just so much fun. And yeah, I it's just like, how can this film make us like care so much about these, characters who like one's a CGI like swamp lizard character, and then this little puppet frog, and it's like I adore so much that's like during those scenes I was just so entertained and like smiling and wide-eyed, and I love the fact that like a character who traditionally might take on an intimidating persona was like uh even though Grogu's been stealing from him, like he's cares for him and like doesn't rat him out
yeah,
to Enbo, and then helps him heal Mando, and I love that. Another one of those characters who just felt like he had a life of his own beyond
yeah.
this movie, and I just thought that was great. And yeah, and like I'm so beyond happy to have it confirmed that he was voiced by Stephen McKinley Henderson, because I love him as an actor.
Yeah, no, he's had so many wonderful roles in small parts, and this, like, again, it's just a voice only performance. Cassie points out in the chat that might have been my favorite random side character, and yeah, it's like he's the kind of character that, like, he just shows up for this like one sequence, and really, and some people, if you're taking this in bad faith, are basically like, he's a plot device to get the and make the antidote for Grogu so that he can heal Mando. It's like, yes, you can look at that in that incredibly shallow way, or you can try to see the deeper purpose here, which is that this is a character who is living on Nalhutta as like, but he's not a criminal. He's not involved in the in the machinations of the huts. He just wants to fish and be left alone. And when Grogu comes and steals from him, he could very easily be a crotchety, get off my lawn. He doesn't have to save Grogu when Grogu gets temporarily eaten by the giant frog thing, which, by the way, like, even though this, obviously they're never going to hurt Grogu, Jon Favreau is not afraid to put Grogu through his paces because Grogu's been dropped, Grogu's been kicked, Grogu's been punched, Grogu's been eaten. Like, it's like, so that little guy's been through a lot. But yeah, like when he essentially has the conversation with Grogu and brings him out, and yes, doesn't dine him out to Embo, because what would be the purpose in that? Like, it was just like, I'm mad that he stole my fish. It's a fish. I can catch another one. Instead, it's like, this little guy's life is worth more than that. And even though he came to me trying to steal from me, I can see that he's hungry and he's alone and he's scared, and I can help him. And he also teaches him kind of a lesson here of the idea that, yes, like, I'm giving you this antidote and hopefully it will work to bring your friend back, but it may be too late. And if that's the case, you just have to learn to, in the classic Star Wars parlance, you have to learn to let go. And I do think Grogu embraces that because, he gives Mando the antidote, but of course it doesn't work right away. And that scene when afterwards he kind of just like nestles himself down into the crook of Mando's arm and is just kind of resting there, like father and son. Like, I think he is preparing himself mentally for the possibility that he might have to let his father figure go. And then, of course, his faith is rewarded. But this is one of those things where, like, yes, like, Gattori is there to get the antidote to Din and Grogu, but, like, if you're willing to engage with it in good faith and look a little deeper past the fact that he's a giant lizard guy, there's more here. There's more intellectual depth and emotion.
Such a It's such a boring way to look at things. I just like, yeah, anybody who would look at that character and say just a plot device, like, I just want to know who hurt you as a child. Um, yeah, because there's just so much more to be found there. There's so much wonder and yeah, and just like, what about the notion of like, you know, there's an element of this movie about like in a sort of galaxy where you've got these characters, you know, that are putting forth cruelty and an effort to subdue others. I think that this movie also has something to say about kindness.
Yes.
And and then that's very evident in Rada and 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 in the character of Dutori and like yeah, I think like unfortunately like if you're a cynic you can look at a movie like this in one way and I don't think it's the right way and um you just have to like I always say and I don't remember who I either ripped this off of you or I ripped it off of Force Center. I don't remember, but like my number one rule for going into any piece of entertainment, is like please just go in with an open heart and And if you're not willing to do that, then you've already made your decision about how you're going to feel about something, beforehand. And it's just such a sort of dull and futile way of engaging with media. Uh, So, but you know what? If that's what works for you, more power to you, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, but I have found it's I just have less and less patience for that as I get older. I just, as you said, I find it to be just such not just like annoying and like disrespectful. It's just so fucking boring to look at movies that way. And I'm just like, I don't want to listen to you because you're just not intellectually curious. And like, I don't have to listen to you. Like, if you're looking at this piece of art that hundreds of people worked on and you're not seeing value in it, like, that's fine. But maybe the problem is you.
Yeah. It's, and again, not everybody has to like everything, but at least engage with it. Don't just like go into something with your mind already made up and then looking for things to validate that
Yeah.
opinion that you went in with. Um, but yeah, so and then I just want to yeah, there were a couple of things that I just wanted to sort of highlight, thinking about particularly in that sequence with Grogu, because I really, we've talked about it a bit. I want to make sure I just hammered home because um, I think it's an incredibly interesting sequence because it comes towards the end of the movie, and it's very interesting to me because it even like in a movie that's kind of been sort of a lot of action throughout it, it's where the movie kind of slows down, but it's all about the emotion of the bond between Din and Grogu. And I really responded to this. You mentioned the moment where like Grogu like cuddles beside, Mando, and like for me it's that moment where like where he reaches down and holds his hand, it's just like I'm just watching the sequence and I'm like, again, like fuck you, Filoni and Favreau, for making me feel so much about a masked character and a little puppet. I just thought it was just so brilliantly done, and then to have it all resolve with like Grogu waking up and Din's not there, and so he goes out to look for him, and then Din stands up and says, "Hey, kid," and then there's just this beat, and he says, "You know, the old protect the young, and the young protect the old. This is the way." And like it just, it was so good, and I and this for me is like one of the big sort of journeys of the movie that these characters go on that I found really compelling. And like, I'm not going to single the person out, but like one of the things that I heard about going into this movie was that somebody said that that the movie sort of presents these ideas of like fatherhood and stuff, and doesn't, and in this person's words, doesn't pay them off. And I'm like, what? Because I think that these two characters go on this wonderfully beautiful journey throughout the movie, and it's about Din realizing that um that Grogu isn't just someone he's that it's his job to protect, but that Grogu is more and more capable
Yeah.
of like, he travels all the way to Nal Hutta to rescue Din, and then takes care of him when he's out of commission, and like finds a way to heal him, and the fact that then we get to the end of the movie and it's like your turn, kid. You've earned it. And then he, lets Grogu like actually pilot the ship. And like, I just thought that that was like, and I know a lot of people wanted like big things like, oh, is Grogu gonna speak for the first time in the movie and stuff like that. But it's like I thought that that in of itself was just a really big step in like their understanding of their relationship, and that it's no longer just this one way thing where Grogu is to be protected. They have this, this bond where they'll be able to rely on each other, and it does show, I think, growth on Grogu's part. The sort of, what he does in this film, and I'm hoping to like actually see him. He might still be a bit trigger happy in the next adventure, but I'd like to see like him being able to like take the controls
Yeah.
and stuff. I think that would be fun. And yeah, so I just really responded to their story in this movie, and I thought like they did like show like these characters going on a journey that for me is like it for me was the emotional underpinning of the movie, and I really responded to it a lot.
Yeah, I mean that this was another one of those streams of criticism that like I get where why people might say it, but I just like I ultimately don't agree, which is that like Din doesn't go on any kind of arc in this movie, and I'm like it's subtle, but you actually it's there. Like the fact that Grogu is not only his adopted son, but he is a Mandalorian apprentice who Din is
Yeah.
teaching, how his the creed and how to live, and like, and we see those moments, like the great little moment that was in the trailer, like the if you're going into battle harm's way, check your armor first, make sure it's snug enough to it's not going to slip, but also it's not going to restrict your movement. But he also like because Grogu is still presented as so childlike, there are moments where Din gets frustrated with him, like the moment when Grogu is pushing all the buttons in the beginning, which again becomes a wonderful 3-beat because first he tells Grogu never touch the buttons, and then when they're trying to extract Janu from his compound, he's like, actually, Grogu, I need you to touch the buttons. And then he's trying to talk him through it, and then Grogu is not doing it correctly. He's sending missiles out, and he's like, no, don't touch that. That's where there's a missile cover on it. And Zeb's like, I don't think he knows what he's doing. And it's like, yes, he doesn't, because Din hasn't taught him. And so now that gives us the 3-beat at the end of the movie. He's like, now I actually am going to teach you how to use these buttons and fly the ship. And part of the reason he does that is because of the sequence where he's incapacitated and Grogu has to take care of him. And it really kind of reinforces for Din that even though Grogu still looks very childlike, he and really hasn't, like, to our eyes, like, aged a day since we've known him, he is growing and maturing. He is not the same character that he was when we met him back in season 1 or season 2, when he was just constantly like all the antics with the like eating the fish lady's eggs or the frog lady's eggs and things. It's like
He still has a tendency to like to swallow
he's
some creatures whole, but
yes, yeah, he is still he is still a hungry little boy. But I think Din is recognizing now that like this is a bit more of a reciprocal relationship. I actually this line was definitely in the trailer. I actually don't remember if it was in the movie or if it was where it was. But there's the line where Din had said, the kid will live centuries beyond me. I won't always be around to protect him.
it wasn't actually in the film.
Yeah, that I thought so, but it still was lingering over this whole idea that like Din needs to prepare Grogu for a time when he won't be around to protect him, and then that moment comes in this movie, and we see that even though he hasn't done it perfectly, Din actually has trained Grogu well, and that then we get the beautiful the old protect the young, and then the young protect the old. This is the way. And I think that is a re-solidification of the idea that Grogu is not just Din's son; he is a Mandalorian apprentice, and he is very capable.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that was not the, I will say that was not the most egregious, like, made for trailer line that this movie ended up getting, because I just recently, after seeing the movie, went and watched some of the TV spots that I didn't watch, and oh my God, were they pumping this movie up to be something that it wasn't.
Yeah.
Um, which I just, oh dear God. Um, but yeah, so like for me, like that stuff was just so great. I really responded to that, and um, and speaking of like Grogu being able to like handle himself, like the payoff of Din teaching him about how to put the armor on and everything. Then we get the freaking absolutely incredible suiting up scene when he goes to rescue Grogu, which might be my favorite, like suiting up in armor scene since Aragorn in the Two Towers.
Yeah. I mean, it's adorable, and yes, he learned that it's how to cinch it up and make it snug.
Yeah,
And I do love that like whole armoring up scene when they're in the gun runner, and not only I did chuckle a little bit that Din finds a new disruptor rifle. Because that was a big thing from season one. Like it was like that weapon is super overpowered, and like hang on to that, and then it disappears. Like where the hell did this pulse rifle go? And now it's like he's getting his Razor Crest back. He's getting his pulse rifle back. It really is kind of like he's getting all his season one toys back. But they're fun and they're effective.
yeah. Well, it's like you got to bring the big guns for the big screen debut. So, um, they're just like, and I do want to like, we don't have to go through all the beats, but like, towards the end when they go in and they're gonna go rescue Rada and take out the huts, and we got the scenes where they're taking on like the giant, the big droids, and I just loved Grogu on the inside. you know, reprogramming them. And so, which again shows like he's really capable. Like,
Yeah.
and just then when his head pops I was like, oh my God, like that's the thing. Like there's just so much adorableness in this movie with Grogu. I can't even handle it. It's
Yeah.
so great.
No, no, that he does he fights, but he fights in his own way, like not only taking down this the droid walkers, which I should note are a great example of I believe this was stop motion done by Phil Tippett, these droids, which was a big selling point before the movie, and like they looked great. And that fight scene was really fun and effective. But then also in when it leads into the final sequence, I love that we get a call back to Grogu's moment with the Rancor, where he comes up face to face with the scary Anuba from Embo's Anuba, and he's like, "Nice doggy, I make it sleep."
Well, and but this also really reminded me actually of Ezra too, and his connection with animals.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, I just I thought that was great. Uh, it's always great seeing a fearsome animal like made through the force become like a cute, adorable little puppy.
Yes. Yes, and I was feeling well disposed towards that Anuba because again, he ultimately did not eat that Enzel. So,
Um, yeah, and I I will say, like, I think one of my biggest cheer moments is like we get, towards the end of the movie, and we can jump back, like, you know, um, but I just wanted to, as long as like we're talking about sort of cute moments, just like the moment when like all the, the Republic ships are coming in, and we're seeing Sigourney Weaver, and we got Zeb and like, and but then we got the Unzelans saying, "We said we'd be back."
Yeah.
It reminded me so much of the Muppet Christmas Carol, where at the end of the movie, Gonzo and Rizzo says, "We're back. We promised we would be."
Well, yes, which again, the Anzellans like are basically little Muppets too, adorable
Yeah,
little Muppets. So it tracks. And yes, they're the fact that they are they're like that, they didn't have to come back, but now they just come back because it's like Grogu and Mando are their buddies and they want to help out. I'm just, and then they're there at the end with the New Republic too. It's just like, yeah, they're such a joy.
yeah. Um, and yeah, and we've talked, earlier on just about like the brawl between the huts and stuff, but like again, it's like, would you have ever thought that we would get to a place where we've got a good hut like in a brawl with two evil huts and like protecting, a little, Yoda like, child, and it's like sometimes I just marvel at the stuff that we get to see in Star Wars that I never imagined we would ever get to see. I mean, just think of the fact that it started off in 1977 with them filming a sequence where they were going to insert, you know, some kind of creature for the Jabba the Hutt, and then they just abandoned it because they couldn't figure it out. And now look where we are.
Oh man, yeah. I mean, another common, bad faith criticism gets leveled at the Mandalorian in particular is that like, oh, it's just Jon Favreau playing with his action figures, and then again, it's like you're not looking deep enough, do better. But also, there are certain sequences where it's almost like, yes, this is kind of what you would do if you were a kid and you had a Hut action figure and another Hut action figure. You would make them fight, and here it is on the big screen, and it's really cool. I mean, I'm sure that there were the people who were engaging with this movie in bad faith. This was probably a scene that was like torture for them to watch because it's three giant slugs rolling around. But that just makes me like it all the more.
See, like, this was a moment where I was like in nirvana because I
Yeah.
was just like, oh my God, this is so great.
uh,
um, yeah, I'm, we've already ragged on the bad faith actors
yeah.
plenty during this stream, but it's like, if you're not okay with just going to the movies and having a fun time, like, and reveling in the joy of like filmmakers like giving you something with the intent to make you happy, then I don't know what to say to you. And yeah, and this was just absolutely glorious. Again, like, yeah, other people can have the argument about whether they think it's a quote unquote perfect movie. I honestly don't think there are any perfect movies except for maybe Amadeus, is my refrain. I always looked at that as a perfect film. But aside from that, like, every movie has little bumps, and or things that you can quibble about. I just, like, again, like I said earlier, I just know that I was smiling from ear to ear throughout this entire movie, and I wouldn't change a thing, honestly. And I just can't wait to see it again. You know, and I'm not going to let anybody rain on that parade. So,
Yeah. No, I mean we've gone through our battles, but I think the fact that we've emerged stronger on the other side for it, having gone through reactions to things that we love, like the Star Wars prequel trilogy and Game of Thrones and the Star Wars sequel trilogy, like we're at the point where we're the two of us are basically like, you can't take our joy away, no matter how hard you try. So,
yeah,
if that's what you want to do, like, talk to the wall. But in this case, I would say that, yeah, like it's actually just like not only a really impressive technical feat, but just kind of, a really interesting, development that it comes down character wise for Rada, because he is essentially fighting, his aunt and uncle who are essentially, trying to torture him or enslave him or kill him, and thematically, like essentially representing what he is supposed to be, and he is rejecting that. So that's what the fight is actually about. It's not just, fools huts punching each other, but it is also that. And so again, you can have, it can contain multiple levels of, while this is going on, we're getting essentially, Din facing off against Embo, who is kind of, represents in many ways what he used to be, because, Embo is a character who, as you said, he's done. Oh yeah, I love this shot, by the way, when he pulls out
Yeah,
the his weapons and is ready to fight, just because it's like Embo, yes, has done some good things, like we saw in the Clone Wars when he helped defend the village, but he is ultimately a character who is still in it for the money, who is taking the Hutt's paycheck, and is ultimately only out for himself at the end of the day. Well, except for his Anuba, he loves his Anuba. But Din has become more than that. And so it's telling that, like, in this scene, Din, he and Embo are very evenly matched, but this time when they fight, Din is victorious because he has grown and changed, and Embo is still following some of the same old patterns.
yeah. It's just like the idea of seeing like the climax of this movie come down to three Huts fighting each other, Grogu taming, an Anuba, uh, you know, and and then Din Djarin and freaking Enbo, involved in fisticuffs and a pretty badass battle. Like, this is like stuff that I didn't ever expect to see in like a big screen Star Wars movie, and I'm just like, I'm just on cloud nine that it exists, and the fact that it's simultaneously made for people who don't get that same kind of thrill from like seeing these very specific, like because of like what it means to sort of the legacy of like the weird corner of Star Wars. But it's like this movie is so accessible to people, um and what you mentioned, that like this is going to be a great movie for like the younger generation, but also like one thing I took note of when I was watching the movie yesterday was that there was a distinctively older audience as well, like people who probably were you know um you know a bit younger, like when the original films came out. And so I think like the Mandalorian appeals to them too. And but also just the idea of going to see like a fun Star Wars movie.
Mm-hmm.
And um and so I was really encouraged by that. It was great to see that like this is a movie that I think appeals to the full spectrum of Star Wars fans. Um and yeah, I hope, like, from what I gather, it's not like, you know, looks like its opening weekend is gonna be more along the lines of, unfortunately, something like Solo. But I don't think the story is necessarily done either. I think there's a possibility this movie could have legs, because I
Mm-hmm.
think this can get a really good word of mouth. And you know what? Even if it doesn't, I think the conversation around Star Wars and box office needs to change.
It,
Um, or just many things in box office. Um, but regardless of like how much money it makes, what the main narrative about the film ends up being, I just loved it to pieces. And and I'll be going to see it again uh, in about a week. So, and I'm gonna have a blast.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing it again as well, just because like there's always going to be things you miss on the first viewing. Like for instance, I did not catch this, but apparently Anthony Daniels has a voice cameo as a droid flight control officer, and I didn't
Yeah.
hear that. But Anthony Daniels keeps his streak of appearing in every single Star Wars movie alive. But I'll be listening for that next time I go see it. But yeah, in terms of the movies, like overall success. Like it really, I think it's on track to make like $102 million over the 4-day weekend, which is basically almost exactly in line with Solo, maybe a little less. And it really kind of again depends on how good faith or bad faith. Because I've seen. I went to the two trades. I went to Hollywood Reporter and I went to Variety. And on Hollywood Reporter, it's like. Mandalorian Grogu makes $102 million, like, and it's exceeding expectations from the studios. And then you go to Variety, and it's like Mandalorian Grogu makes $102 million, the lowest opening for a theatrical Star Wars movie in the Disney era ever. And I'm just like, okay, and it's just but you have to remember that like this movie was made for a significantly lower budget then it's going to have no trouble making its money back. One of the thing that always gets brushed aside with Solo and the fact that it made only $400 million, perish the thought, was the fact that the reason it was considered a box office failure is because they had to essentially reshoot the entire movie, so the budget was essentially double it, and so like it couldn't meet that threshold. But if it costs something more like Mandalorian and Grogu, I think the budget was like $165 million. It's going to make that back in a couple weeks. Like, chill. And this movie was never going to make $1 billion. And so anyone holding it to the standard of like what the sequel trilogy in Rogue One did, it's like you were just moving the bar to move the bar. And I do think, as you said, this movie will have legs because it is getting like, I put very little stock anymore in Rotten Tomatoes like critic scores, because again, I think sometimes the critics are the worst faith type of people for this type of movie. But what I do sometimes pay attention to is audience scores, because that oftentimes is predictive of how well a movie's legs are going to do. And the audience scores for this movie are great, especially, as we said, for like long-term, young kids and older fans alike. So it's like this movie, I think, ultimately is going to be considered a success. Perhaps not a home run, but a double. Like, and for Star Wars' return to theaters, like, that's really what we needed and wanted, because like one of the reasons ultimately I was kind of glad that this movie became the first Star Wars movie back after the 7-year gap is because any Star Wars movie that was going to be the first after the gap was going to have such an immense amount of pressure on it. And as much as I desperately want that Rey movie, I was very worried that if it was the first one out of the gate, people were just going to be ready to have their knives out for it. But then, Mandalorian and Grogu basically took that bullet right on its Beskar armor and was like, fine. And so it's just one of those things where you kind of have to recognize that people are going to say their bad faith criticisms and the like, but this is a movie that had. I talked about the fact that it was perhaps not quite as ambitious as certain other Star Wars movies, but I don't think that was a bad thing, because it was a perfect example of the type of movie it was trying to be. And getting mad at it for not being what it wanted to be. We're getting mad at it for essentially not being something that it's not, again, is an example of, you engaging people and choosing how to engage with the story as presented to them or not. Like this movie, yet no, this movie is not Andor. Like, no, it is not like the premium steak from the highest, restaurant, quality restaurant, but it's still, if it was trying to be a cheeseburger, it was a damn good cheeseburger. And it's like, this is where but I think it's even more than that. Like, it's just a question of like, on the Star Wars buffet, as we like to say, what are you looking for? This movie wanted to be a fun, pulpy adventure that entertained audiences across all ages. And I think it did that. I think it did that very well. And like, if that's not your preferred flavor of Star Wars, there's plenty else for you. And even though I've said that like it's probably my least favorite of the live action Star Wars movies, that really doesn't have much to do with how successful I think the movie is. I think it's phenomenally successful. It has to do with my personal taste. And my personal taste is, as we've said, probably not exactly what would align with what people think of the consensus for Star Wars movies. Because like, you know what movies I have very, very, very high on my personal list that a lot of people don't? Rise of Skywalker and the Phantom Menace. so, so this is one of,
Well,
and
at least we're aligned on one of those.
well, I mean, yes, that's fine, we talked for 5.5 hours about the Rise of Skywalker on this channel a few weeks, so I know that even if it's not necessarily to your personal taste, you're not one of those people who's basically like, this movie sucks and has no value. And like, you are engaging with art in a better faith way than that. And that's the way I kind of feel about this. I'm like, I kind of think that this movie is a movie that it was trying to, what it's trying to be may not, mean that it's never, for instance, going to be as emotionally profound for me as something like The Rise of Skywalker or Revenge of the Sith or The Empire Strikes Back, because those are movies that essentially shaped my life. But that doesn't mean that I won't watch it and love it 100 times over, because it's a great Star Wars movie.
Yeah, I'll just, the sort of final thing I'll say on that is that I think a lot of it for me a lot of the Star Wars movies struggle for me with consistency. Um, and there's a number of them that are on the, shall we say, messy side. And I think that for me, part of what makes this one stand out so much is that I regard it as one of the least, like, I want to see how I want to rephrase this. One of the least messy Star Wars movies, and sort of one of the most sort of consistent ones from a sort of quality standpoint. Like, for me, like something like Attack of the Clones has a lot of highs, but it also has, to be perfectly honest, a lot of the lowest lows for me too. And you know, and there are moments from Rise of Skywalker which I think work really well, but then there's a lot of moments that just uh, sort of fail on an execution level for me, um, and so I think like part of what I enjoyed so much about this movie was that like it just felt to me like they got to make exactly the movie they wanted to make, and it all just I thought came together so beautifully. Um, which is, and it's ironic that like I say that as a positive, because I almost feel like the argument, like what you're saying, could almost sort of ring uh as familiar to me, because I am very famous for saying like I will champion the Fox Marvel films over the MCU, which for now it's a little different because people regard many of you know the MCU movies from this sort of current era as like being quote unquote messier than like the Infinity Saga. But I remember like for me, the Infinity Saga was an example of like, the movies were all very well executed, but they just didn't have like the emotional gravitas of something, that I would respond to more like the first two X-Men films or Logan or, things like that. And so So tonal, so consistency isn't everything if that consistent level doesn't like meet your criteria for what you find super engaging. Um, and I always reference something like Alexander as one of the messiest movies ever made, but I applaud its ambition and its artistry and like what Oliver Stone was striving for. And um but so it's complicated feelings I have about all that. But like I said, I really did emotionally respond to this movie, and like if nothing else, it was just one of the most all out like fun movies in the franchise for me. I think it's going to have immense like replay value, and so yeah, it's like I think Andor, for example, is something where like emotionally, like that hits me really hard. That makes me feel like, when I'm watching some of the really sad episodes of that show, I'm gonna be like, it's gonna punch me in my gut and really affect me. But I might not revisit that as much as a Mandalorian and Grogu, which I know I can turn on and smile and have a fun time. And so which one of those is more valuable? How about neither? How about they both have their place and it's just different? And but but sometimes you just need a fun movie. And like I felt the exact same way when I went to go see Solo. I saw it by myself late at night, really late at night in Dallas during one of the Con of Thrones
Mhm.
conventions. Uh, and I saw it in what was the theater? The not the ArcLight. The well, what's the movie theater where they let you order food and stuff?
Oh,
The
Alamo Dome, or
yeah, the
yeah,
Alamo Draft House.
that was it.
And like, and I just remember that because Laura didn't want to go with me because we had to like leave the next day. Um to like because flights were the next day and I was going to like a midnight showing of the movie. So she thought I was crazy. But it ended up being such a deliriously fun time. And it's still one of my favorite Star Wars theatrical experiences. And I felt the same way going to see this. I was less tired, but it was that kind of just like, fun adventure that like, just makes you happy. And like I said, I was happy for the whole rest of the day after I saw the movie. And sometimes that's just exactly what you want. And so I'm looking forward to, as I said, seeing it again, and then eventually getting it on home video. I do wonder if this is one of the films that I will cave at buying the digital copy of, because I'll just want to relive the fun again. And like I said, like when it comes to a movie that's like rewatchable, and I know I'm going to watch it a billion times, I kind of don't mind springing for it early.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the things that kind of sets Star Wars apart for many of us, is the fact that these movies are so rewatchable, and they are many of the lessons that we take from them, and the emotions that we glean from them, that they inspire in us, come from essentially the relationship we build with it over time. The fact that we've watched these movies again and again and again and again, and we discover new things, like and for both of us, we've only seen this particular movie once, so like our first, these are very much still our first reactions. And like, for instance, like I did not cry during this movie. I've cried at various points at every single other live action Star Wars movie, not this one, but I can fully see if I watch this movie a couple, 5, 6, 7 more times, like maybe one of those times the Grogu and Mando scenes in where he's taking care of them might elicit a tear from me because the emotion is there. And certain things when I'm very protective of other movies, like something like Attack of the Clones, which I agree has some of like the issues where like the execution delta between the ambition and the uh and the what's on screen sometimes falls a little bit short, but like I always respect when a movie is willing to go for that ambitious peak, and then when it hits it, I respect that immensely. Like that's like I would say, like, Attack of the Clones has some of my favorite things in all of Star Wars, with like the Across the Stars and Obi-Wan and Django on Camino and things like that. And yes, like the love I've built for something like Rise of Skywalker, I've talked about it. A lot of it, I didn't walk out of my very first saying like this is one of my most beloved and important Star Wars movies. That built over time when I just was like I'm responding to something and I go back and I revisit it. And by the time I saw it 16 times in the theater, I was like, yes, I get what it is that this movie is drawing out of me that makes me love it so very, very much. And I hope it's the same with Mandalorian and Grogu, because I do, as I said, even if this is not my preferred flavor of Star Wars always, like there's so much here to love. And I would really just, you mentioned Solo. Solo is a movie that I think operates in a very similar vein. It's probably the most direct analog because it is a fun adventure, but I just like, and that's kind of how I took it in on the first viewing. But over time, I found such deep themes in it related to Han's character and what it says about him to have gone on this emotional journey. And I didn't get all of that from my first viewing, but I will. Like when I saw it 4 times in the theaters, and by the end, I was discovering things that I hadn't seen before. And so that is the reason. And like for some, even to bring in the shows, like something like Obi-Wan Kenobi, which I love to death, like there are elements of that show that are like technically not on the highest level because they were filming it during the freaking pandemic. And maybe people think it's a little messy at times. For me, the emotions of it are so, pure and raw that like it always brings me to tears by the end of episode 6. And I'm just like, that's one of my favorite Star Wars stories ever. And so it's just, as I said, it's when you know you're going to have a long-term relationship with a movie in the franchise like this that we both love, it's okay not to be completely settled on your reaction after one viewing. Like this is not one of those movies where I'm thinking about like that was a good experience, but I don't know when I'm ever going to watch it again. Like I know I'm going to go see this movie at least 1 or 2 more times before it leaves theaters, and then we'll be buying it on digital and Blu-ray like the second it's available. And over time, who knows where it will end up. Right now it's at the bottom of my list, but that can change.
Yeah, and whereas with me, it's already like the question is just now how high is it gonna go? Because
Yes.
because it's already. I think if I'm honest with myself, like right now, it's probably about I've got it placed sort of in that middle clump of like overall in terms of all the Star Wars movies. So we'll see if it's sort of raises up higher with additional viewings. Um, but yeah, because I'm going to acknowledge it's not like on the level of something like the original Star Wars trilogy or you know uh you know Phantom Menace. For me, like you and I are aligned on that, like being one of our favorite Star Wars movies, and the haters be damned. um and then probably like Force Awakens is in my upper echelon, too. And then this is probably somewhere after that, like along the same, like in that same general vicinity as like Solo is. Um and yeah, it's but I look forward to seeing how my like love of it evolves when I get to see it more than one time. That is one of the fun things about doing these streams when we talk about a new movie that we've only seen once, is that like the impression of the film is not yet fully formed, and it's almost like we're recalling a dream we had, about a movie. I felt the same way when we did our review of Dune Part Two, where I had not yet gotten the opportunity to like dissect it in the way that I normally like to do.
Yeah.
But in its own way, that's kind of fun. So, uh, but yeah. Um, do you have any like final comments or things that we didn't touch on that you wanted to make sure to mention before we close things up?
I mean, the only other thing that I kind of wanted to just kind of think about is this movie essentially, essentially the future of like where we think that this movie is going to lead and go, because the original Mandalorian series, like that season 3, actually really did have the feeling of like a series finale in many ways. And of course, by the time when they made that, like I don't. This movie was probably this movie got announced in January of 2024. So like Jon Favreau didn't know he was going to make a movie. He was going to make season 4. And the question that I'm kind of having is like, if this movie is financially successful, like, does that mean we'll get Mandalorian season 4, or will they now keep it as a big screen property and we'll get a sequel, or maybe we won't, and we'll just see the Mandalorian and Grogu again in Dave Filoni's like New Republic movie, kind of wrapping up all the stories of this era. Because obviously, like they're not. Grogu's not going anywhere. He's too big for in terms of what is important to driving marketability for Disney and Lucasfilm. So I'm just really kind of curious where things will go next, because obviously in the larger story, we know, for instance, that Grand Admiral Thrawn is the big villain of this era, and he was not mentioned in this movie, as we said. We know he's going to be a massive part of Ahsoka season 2, but I really just am very eager to see, like, in terms of this New Republic era of storytelling, what is the shape of it? Are we just going to get Ahsoka season 2, and then we'll get the Dave Filoni movie, and then that's it? Or will we get another Mandalorian and Grogu story before then? I would advocate for another season of Skeleton Crew myself, but I'm just very curious because they have a lot. They've been very cagey about what's coming next for Star Wars after Starfighter next year, and obviously Starfighter will be taking us into a new era of Star Wars after the events of The Rise of Skywalker, which I personally hope will lead eventually into the Rey Skywalker New Jedi Order movie, or the Simon Kinberg trilogy, which will eventually, I think, basically be episodes 10, 11, and 12. But in this timeline, in this era, this is kind of what we've come to know as the Mandoverse. And we've gotten a lot of great storytelling here already, but it's clearly not done. So, and this movie ends basically on essentially Din says he's going to take a little break, but we know he's not out of the fight yet, and Grogu is, he and Grogu will be back. So, what form will that take? I can't wait to find out.
Are you saying you want to know what the plan is?
I mean, I do. I'm not knocking on Dave Filoni's door demanding it, but I am interested to essentially find really the biggest thing, even just separating out like the plot events, is like, are we going to go back and do Mandalorian season 4, or is the Mandalorian now a big screen character and we're just going to see him in movies?
Yeah, it's really frustrating because every time it seems like they have a plan, those plans get derailed. And then it becomes something else. Um, if they had stuck to the plan, this is not the first Star Wars movie that we would have
Mhm.
gotten back on the big screen. So it's like, yeah, I will admit to being sort of curious. I do kind of wonder, like, depending on how much of a success they view this movie as if they'll just want to continue with big screen adventures
Mhm.
for Mando and Grogu. Because it's got to be tantalizing the thought of like continuing on with this sort of like being able to do things bigger
Mhm.
for these characters, as opposed to going back to like, doing, you know, using mostly the volume and, and operating on the smaller scale that, although they've been able to do some admirable things within that smaller scale, like that season 3 finale is a pretty big freaking event. um, but yeah, that's I could go either way on it. I don't know which way they're gonna go with that. All I know is that like they're not done with these characters. That's for damn sure.
Yeah.
It's just a question of what form that's gonna take. And I will say what this has me pumped for is Ahsoka season 2.
Yes.
Because I think it's like, even though it may not be obvious to sort of general audiences, this movie is laying the foundation for, sort of for what's coming next in the Republic, in the New Republic War, against Thrawn. He may not get mentioned by name, but like this movie is setting the groundwork for, oh, these Imperial warlords actually don't have their shit together.
Yeah.
So the New Republic is able to sort of handle them, but when Thrawn, with Thrawn re-entering the picture, that's going to be a problem for them, and so it'll be interesting to really see that come to fruition in Ahsoka season 2. Um, Speaking of which, let's get a trailer. Even though it's going to be a while now because the show's not premiering until early next year. So, damn it.
Yeah.
But I would like to see something. Uh, but yeah, it would be nice to know that they have a plan beyond just what's the next movie going to be. And like for a while, the only thing that I was certain of was that we were getting a Mandalorian and Grogu movie.
Yeah.
Um, and obviously they've been in production uh on Starfighter, so like confident that's gonna find its way to the big screen. But and we know we're getting Ahsoka season 2, we're getting Maul Shadow Lord season 2, but beyond that, I think it's all up in the air.
Yeah.
Um,
And I do think that they know more than they're telling us, because I
yeah,
think one of the things that they've kind of learned from this, some of the stops and starts, is the perils of announcing something maybe before it's ready, and then having the plans change and fans feeling like they're walking something back. And it's all tied up with also like the future of Star Wars on Disney Plus, for instance, because I absolutely think that they need to continue to have at least one live action Star Wars show on Disney Plus as an ongoing way to keep their subscriber base, in addition to the great animated shows that we get. And we know that Jon Favreau says like he has the scripts for Mandalorian season 4 sitting right there on his desk because he didn't use them to make this movie. But I just don't know if like, is Disney really going to just say like, no, Star Wars is going back to the big screen for live action and we'll get animated shows on Disney Plus? Because I think that as a company, Lucasfilm and Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau, like, and all the other creators who are working there, I think that they have a lot of ideas about what to do. It's unfortunately, and we hate to always have this looming over, it's a question of what does Disney think is safe and marketable, because we know, for instance, that they killed the Hunt for Ben Solo movie because they just didn't get it. And like, woof, that was a mistake. And
yeah, and this is not just a Disney problem either.
yeah,
It's, the industry at large of not wanting to take risks, getting trigger happy with cancellations, and yeah, it's unfortunate the state of things right now. I just had like a show that I was so excited to watch the first season of, and then it just got announced that it was canceled the other
yes,
day, and I'm like, well,
Spartacus, yeah, Spartacus,
yeah.
House of Ashley, yeah,
So I was like, fuck that.
yeah.
And so yeah, I don't know. It's like on the one hand, like nobody would be happier than me if the focus for Disney Plus was placed firmly on Star Wars animation. But I also recognize that that might not be the best thing for sort of the plans of expanding out the franchise. Um, because as much as I enjoyed this movie and the scale of the story, and getting to see this kind of a Star Wars story on the big canvas of a theatrical movie, I recognize that that's not probably not going to be the norm. It's going to be for the Star Wars movies, they're gonna want big, like, save the galaxy stakes. And so I think Disney Plus is still the best avenue for smaller stories with more personal stakes. And I don't want to see that end because I think that's been one of the most exciting parts of the expansion of the Star Wars universe is getting stories that are a bit more in line with what we got for years with like the Star Wars novels and the expanded universe, is that like not everything was about defeating Palpatine and destroying the latest Death Star. It's like uh you're allowed to explore these more intimate stories, and that's what was so great about this movie. But I recognize that that can't they can't and won't be the norm. And so again, I say I think Disney Plus is still the best avenue for that.
Yeah.
um but yeah, we'll see.
We'll see. All we know is that if this were the MCU, there would be a little chyron at the end that says the Mandalorian and Grogu will return,
Yeah,
because they obviously will.
I kind of still wish that was there because it would have fit with the movie. Um, and one more thing I'll pop up. I shared this in the Slack, but I'm gonna show it here. There was somebody at my IMAX showing that was dressed up as Mando,
Yeah,
and I got a picture. I was very excited about that.
did they take their helmet off in the theater? Because I always wonder about that, where like people go into the movies in these full costumes, and then I'm like, can you actually see the movie through that helmet?
I don't know, but I don't know. Maybe they worked for the theater. I don't know. It looks like a more. I don't know. I was not clear on if they were an audience member or somebody who worked for the theater that was doing it for the opening day. But either way,
Regardless, it's a
the
cool picture.
picture was much appreciated, and it just added like to the event feeling of the whole thing. So,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, uh, so that's I think that winds down our discussion. So yeah, again, I'll just say I absolutely love the movie. Can't wait to see it again. And yay, we're finally back with Star Wars on the big screen. So
Yes, indeed.
um I do want to talk about what's coming up. Um and we have a little bit of a change in plans, mostly related to my finances and me trying I've got some spending next month. So I'm not buying a certain digital release of something, but also it gives us an opportunity to uh, have a conversation that we wanted to for a while. So first and foremost, next week we're going to be getting back around to the rest of Outlander season 2, talking about the final 6 episodes of the season. So that's going to be a lot of fun, although there will be lots of like heavy drama and heartbreak and all the stuff that we've become accustomed to. And then on June 7th, instead of doing what we were originally going to do, which was we were going to talk about Project Hail Mary, we're actually going to hold off until that comes out on Blu-ray so that I can buy the 4K and then we can discuss it. So that'll be later on in August. So instead of talking about that, we are actually going to swing back around to one of our absolute favorite movies of last year, Chloe Zhao's Hamnet, which we did get to talk a little bit about on our Oscar stream, but not nearly enough. And so we're gonna go ahead and give that movie the attention it deserves. And I think we're both pretty psyched about that, because especially like I went back and I was listening to the score a bit the other day, and I was like, oh shit, this movie is so impactful.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely adored Hamnet. It was I think my second favorite movie of last year and your third favorite movie of last year. And yeah,
Yep.
20 minutes on the Oscar stream is not nearly enough for a movie this rich and this emotionally impactful. I can't wait for that discussion, even though obviously it's it's a movie that deals with some very heavy subject matter. So it will be emotional. It's not like the Mandalorian and Grogu in terms of its tone, but that just goes to show that you and I love a wide range of movies, and that'll be a great discussion.
Um, yeah, I don't think there will be any disagreement whatsoever about how emotionally impactful Hamnet is.
Yeah.
And then next week, June 14th, we have something special planned. It's
Yeah.
actually going to be our 100th anniversary as proper 100th anniversary. Hasn't been quite that long. 100th stream as as like proper co-hosts. We just recently streamed, talked about our actual 100th episode of us streaming together, but it will have been 100 episodes since we were officially co-hosts.
Mhm.
And so we thought we would do something special for that stream. And we've stumbled upon something that is both a long time coming, fitting, and has the potential to piss many people off. Um, which is that we are going to be talking about dum 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 dum
Um,
the 15th anniversary of a certain television series called Game of Thrones.
let's go. Yes,
Yeah.
it is. I am so ready. I don't know if I've ever been more hyped for a stream that we're gonna do, other than maybe the Rise of Skywalker. But I would just say, because this, we've told this before, but the reason that Gwen and I are friends is because we connected on the old website that shall not be named. Um, Over Game of Thrones during the latter seasons, when we were both just loving what the show was doing. And so we would every week be comparing notes. And then that led obviously to our discovery of other shared common interests like Star Wars and Keira Knightley movies like Pride and Prejudice. And so a beautiful friendship was born. But Game of Thrones has always been a pillar of it. And we really, the only reason we haven't talked about it on these channels was, one, by the time we were doing this together, the show had ended, but also because we have such strong opinions about Game of Thrones that some of our friends don't share, and we always were like, do we really want that heat, or do we just want to like kind of let our love stand as is? But we kind of broke the seal when we finally talked about a Night of the Seven Kingdoms a couple weeks ago. And when we were thinking about ideas for the stream, Gwen just threw out the idea of like, well, maybe we'll talk about Game of Thrones. And then as soon as we got off the stream, I was like, actually, that is a fantastic idea. Because
Well,
as you said, go ahead.
because it's also a way for us to dip our toes into, because we are definitely not in a position right now where we would like tackle it season by season, because we've got our Outlander coverage going on, and like I don't want to do like two
Yeah.
like long-term television projects at the same time on the channel. So marking this as an occasion to just sort of talk, like give an overview about like our feelings and the impact Game of Thrones has had on us, and some of our less popular opinions about how uh you know about how, I'm just going to say it, how wonderful the show, was right to the end, which is not shared by by many of our friends, if any of them at all. And so yeah, it's going to be very cathartic to have that conversation, but also it's like, even putting aside that element of it, it's just such a foundational part of our friendship that it's just going to feel great to just talk about the show and talk about characters that we love, and so I think it's going to be really fun. So
And yeah, I think it will be, because it will be more of a general celebration slash overview, and it just happens to be happily serendipitous that it is the 15th anniversary of Game of Thrones, which the HBO was celebrating a lot last April, because that's when the show premiered. But technically, it is still the 15th anniversary, because the first season was still airing in May, when this
yeah,
and so we will have the opportunity to really just kind of reflect back on that time, reflect on our journey with the show, as it, because I have never been more obsessed with a television show in my entire life than Game of Thrones, and it really did, teach me lessons and shape me as a fan of, art,
funny
cinematic
enough,
art.
we can also celebrate the 15th anniversary of A Dance with Dragons, the last book published.
How I'm sure that will come up as well. And then the other kind of happy fortuitous nature of this happening to fall exactly where it does is that we're going to be doing the stream on June 14th, which is exactly 1 week before House of the Dragon season 3 premieres.
Yep.
So we will get to kind of look forward to that as well.
One might almost say it's absolutely perfect timing.
Yes, indeed.
Um, so yeah, so really excited about that. And then the next couple weeks after that, we're going to be getting really retro the week after that, because we're going to have our good friend AK come on the channel, and we're going to chat about the 1995 version of Mortal Kombat, which I'm very excited about. I have loved that movie since I was a kid, and there's going to be a beautiful new restored 4K version released by Arrow Video, which I should get shortly before we do that stream. So I will be able to, have a whole new, fresh, uh, experience watching that. Um, yeah, uh, so that's going to be just so much fun. And it's honestly, it's going to be just as great just to have AK back on the channel, because it's been too long, and we love having her on here. She just honestly makes us look so much better.
Her enthusiasm is all and passionate are always welcome.
Yeah. And then the 2 weeks after that, we will then be getting to the third season of Outlander. But then we're going to be going on a bit of a break, uh, because I will be gone for 2 weeks on a cruise with my family. Then, and something that we haven't really talked about, but I saw it on the schedule. Looks like you've got a wedding you're attending the week after that. So,
Yeah, yeah. We had had something on there originally, and then you removed it. But then I remembered that weekend, my dear friend Nirali from residency, my family medicine residency, she's getting married that weekend in Delaware. So I'll be flying over for that. And because the wedding's on Saturday, that means I would be flying home on Sunday. And I was just like, I don't think I'm going to be able to make it in time for a stream. So and it just happened to work out that like you were going to be gone the preceding 2 weeks anyway. So it just means the break will be slightly longer. But, sometimes we like to take little breaks in between these discussions just so we can refresh and recharge. Because as much as we love doing them, doing them every single week sometimes can be, make it be a little, demanding. But we'll come back refreshed and ready and recharged after the break with more great stuff.
uh, yeah, and I think that'll come at just perfect time, because we're also going to be doing some behind the scenes technical changes,
Yeah.
which I won't mention since we're technically on a certain service that um I don't think they can boot us out early, but I'm not going to elaborate on that. But anyway, it works out very well to have just go ahead and have that extra week, and so yeah, um, so yeah, that's what's on the agenda in the future. So we got a lot of fun stuff, and yeah, and looking forward to it. You looking forward to getting back to Outlander next week, Jared?
I am. I actually I've been very diligent about trying to watch the show like in these episodic chunks as we're going so that I don't get too ahead of it. But I was so really excited and moved by the end of the first half of Outlander season 2 that I found myself for the first time being like, I kind of want to just jump and start watching the rest of it now, but I'm like, no, I'm going to hold off and then I'll have something to look forward to the following week.
Good. Well, now that we're through this week, you can start whenever you want, and
Exactly.
so yeah. But yeah, thank you for everybody who tuned in tonight and chatted with us about the movie. Again, this was just so much fun, just because it's been 7 years since we had a Star Wars movie to talk about, and well. 7 years, a new Star Wars movie to talk about, because we've done a lot of chatting about Star Wars movies
We
uh,
have.
over the past year or so. But yeah, which just made this so perfect. And yeah. Oh, the only thing else I forgot to show off, I did have it like on standby, but I never did like my show and tell thing. I did have Mando here, the action figure. So
That's great. Yeah, I don't have
yeah.
anything I don't have anything to show and tell. The only thing I have is that I wore my Boba Fett shirt because even though Boba Fett is not in this movie as I once hoped he would be, like he's still a Mandalorian, wears the cool Mandalorian armor. So
And plus we've got elements from the Book of Boba Fett in
yeah,
the movie
we
in
do.
the form of the twins. So like yeah, still waiting for that 4K release of the Book of
Yeah,
Boba Fett. They
yeah.
really need to get on that.
Yeah, I've been waiting for that steel book for for so long because it did frustrate me that they skipped over it and just went to the Mando season 3 when I'm like, Book of Boba Fett's kind of important to the story of the Mandalorian, guys. But I'm also sure that we'll get it eventually because I know they're probably going to also want to release Andor season 2 and then hopefully the Skeleton Crew and the Acolyte as well.
Yeah, I've been really disappointed that they have been radio silent on any new like physical media releases for the shows. Pretty much any hope that I had of the animated shows making their way has kind of been extinguished, because at this point we'll be lucky if all the live action shows you
Yeah.
know make it to home video. So which sucks because there's just so much great stuff, and I had, and as far as like non Star Wars Lucasfilm stuff, like I've really hoped that somewhere somehow the Willow series would make it sway on the physical media, so there would be some way to watch it. But
Uh, let's just say there are ways, and I have found those ways because even though I normally do not hold with sailing on the pirate days, when you remove the show from your streaming service entirely, all bets are off.
I uh I am familiar with those ways. There are there's a certain Netflix show that was just recently pulled from its service that is now in my possessions. So because I would not allow uh, the show to be erased from history, because it's actually a pretty important series for representation, and aside from being a fantastic series, and so I'm doing my part in making sure that uh, I have a physical copy in my library, and and the show will live on. Uh, Streaming services really suck when it comes to just
Yeah,
disappearing things.
yeah. Don't. frickin' cancel and remove streaming series for tax break, guys. It's probably one of the most anti-art things you can do, in addition to all the AI crap you're doing. So do better.
Uh, okay, so I think that'll wrap things up. Again, thank you everybody who joined us. We'll see you next week for Outlander, and yeah, uh, yeah. I think now this is one of those weeks where we have the perfect sign off, and this is the way.
This is the way.